it's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking that you have to pay to like be successful as someone who's learning how to code. And we have that idea that if we pay for something, it has more value than something that's free. But there are some amazing free things out there, and I usually try to recommend things that are free or affordable.
Welcome back to the Free Code Camp podcast. I'm Quincy Larson, teacher and founder of freeCodeCamp.org. Each week, we're bringing you insight from developers, founders, and ambitious people getting into tech. This week, we're talking with Dorian Develops. He's a software engineer and prolific YouTube creator. Dorian grew up in Little Havana as a child of a single mother refugee from Cuba. After a rough childhood and dropping out of high school in 9th grade, Dorian eventually found himself as a valet car parker in Las Vegas. It was here that Dorian realized he needed to make changes for the sake of his family. He taught himself to code using freeCodeCamp and other free open learning resources, and he has since gotten 6-figure jobs as a web developer and created a popular YouTube channel. Dorian, welcome to the Free Code Camp podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, man. Like, you're somebody I've followed for, I don't know, like 4 years or so. I've watched a ton of your videos over the years and kind of followed your career progression and your many popular videos on like just learning more about you. It's like learning about Dorian is like peeling back different layers of an onion and exposing new kind of like levels of Dorianism.
I'm like Shrek. I mean, anyone who's got kids and has watched Shrek will get that reference, I'm sure.
Yeah. So first of all, like for those, most people listen to the audio edition, but if you're watching the video edition, you can see Dorian's background, and it's just like wood, like it's like raw construction. Where are you?
Yeah, it's OSB board, I think is what that's called. I don't really know too much about construction
OSB
work,
board.
But yeah, I am in a wooden shack that my brother-in-law built for us to have a co-working space and office where we can work together as we are visiting his new house in Washington, because we're stopping by for the summer or the tail end of the summer before we head back out to Southeast Asia.
Yeah, so you have lived in a lot of places, of course, Florida, Las Vegas, and now the Pacific Northwest, but you've also traveled extensively. We're going to talk about a lot of that. But right now, like, what is going on in your world? Like, right at this exact moment that we're catching you.
So right at this exact moment, we just came back to Washington about 4 weeks ago, and we got about 3 weeks left before we go back to Asia. About, I don't know, like 7-8 months ago, kind of decided to take a break from working and try to pursue full-time content creation and dabble in some indie hacking while my family and I travel the world a bit. We did this about a year and a half before that, and we went to Europe. And, I have some videos where I kind of talk about that being a bit of a failure on my end because I couldn't make it work for various reasons. And then after coming back, we kind of, I immediately went into a developer job. Actually, it was a design job, but it was back into software. And almost instantly, I was like, we want to travel again. Even my wife was like, we're not really liking this, but we signed the lease and did the right thing. So we stuck it out for that year. And then we pretty much got back on the road as soon as the lease was up. And that's what we've been doing since. So that was about January, February this year. We headed back out.
Awesome. Yeah. When I was living in China as a 24-year-old, like 25-year-old, with my wife. We got married like you. We got married very early. I've been married for like 19 years. And you've been together with your wife for probably nearly that amount of time. I think you mentioned you two got together when you were like 23 or something like that.
Yeah, we started dating right around 23 or 24 for me. She's a couple years older than me. So I got married right before turning 28. Oh, if she hears this episode, she'll be like, "How long have we been together? Huh? You messed it up on the interview, huh?" But no, we've been together forever now, like 15 years, and we've been married for over 10. So
Yeah, that's awesome, man. And you have kids as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
We had kids a little later. My first was born when I was about 31. So
Yeah, and
waited.
similar with me. Like we waited. I think 34. I think I'm slightly older than you. I'm 43. But yeah, like similarly, we waited to make sure our economics were in order, and we'd done what we needed to do as far as like earning degrees and certifications, and my wife got her CPA and everything like that, and like so we're like finally okay, we feel like comfortable that we can have kids, but we didn't go. So what I was going back to is like I was in China and there was this book that came out called Vagabonding by Ralph Potts, and it's about like basically like saving up a bunch of money and then going on the open road and like traveling, and he talks about like how this is really something designed for like people that are young, that don't have a lot of responsibility, that don't necessarily have a spouse or kids or anything like that, but that it is technically viable to do with kids, but he's not sure exactly how you would do it because he didn't do it with kids. So, but he'd met people doing this, like basically, like this, and this was 20 plus years ago. So it was before, indie hackers like Revolution, and before Peter Levels and like all these other people kind of proved out the concept of being, a digital nomad, right? And it sounds to me like you're kind of like living that lifestyle, like you're parking somewhere, you're saving up some money, and then you're getting on the road and exposing your kids to all these different cultures and all these different experiences in Europe and Asia. Can you like we're absolutely, just to be completely clear, we're going to talk a lot about software development on this podcast, but I cannot resist. I have to talk a little bit about your recent travels and your philosophy toward taking your kids and showing them the world.
So yeah, it's funny because this actually, like thinking about it, and I've thought about this a couple times recently, it kind of all goes back to learning how to code. Funny enough, because I remember when I was learning how to code, and I was talking to my wife, and back then at that point in time, it still felt very much like a dream, right? Like I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to land a job. I wasn't sure if what I was doing was going to eventually lead to me doing it as a career, and I was just kind of learning online and freeCodeCamp and different resources. And at that time, I remember talking to my wife, and I was like, one day if I do this as a job, I could eventually go remote, and then one day we could like live anywhere in the world. And it didn't exactly play out that way, but it kind of did in a way, because I do think that my YouTube channel started around me talking about learning how to code, and then that's kind of helped us afford being able to travel, because it does kind of fund that a bit. But it is a bit of a weird life to live, I guess, when you try to do it. There are a few things that we kind of, did not intentionally, but it kind of worked out that way with the way that we educate our children. They were at school age during COVID, so we had either the choice of like we start them in school and they go to school on a tablet, or my wife at that time, she had a friend that was a close family friend that had two kids the same age, and they were like, maybe we just start like our own little homeschool with just our kids. We at that point it was social distancing, and we knew that they were being good about following the rules, and we were too, and we were like, all right, we'll just do this. And they converted their basement into a preschool. My wife's friend's husband was in construction, and he built a whole, like, it looked like a legit preschool. It even had like the floors that with the specs,
like
just
the foamy
like a preschool
floor.
Yeah,
so when kids fall, they don't get hurt.
Yeah,
like
it
with
was
like
great.
the little puzzle piece, like borders, so you can like clamp them together.
If I could find pictures, it would be great, because if you'd see it, you'd be like, man, that does look just like a preschool. So that kind of set us up for homeschooling, and then we just kind of kept doing it, even though like after COVID we could have put them in school. We did. My daughter wanted to go to school for a bit, so we let let her do it. And after it was about a couple months, she was just like, I don't like it. It's not like how we learn at home, and we just sit at the chair all day. It is like, all right, well, you got to try it. And then we just kept homeschooling, and homeschooling has been it's really hard to travel with children and like work out the education aspect of it. And like, I can't take too much credit for that because my wife really does do a lot of that part. I do my best to help where I can, and everything is a learning experience, especially when you travel. You have a lot of like real world experience that you can't really get in school. Like my kids have been to Angkor Wat in Cambodia, which is, like 2,000-year-old temples, and they're learning about all kinds of ancient history and stuff like that. That's like really cool. And, they've been to London, and they've gotten to see like Big Ben and, the Royal Palace and Buckingham and all of this stuff where, that's definitely like more geography and history that we're teaching them. But we make sure to also teach them reading and math as part of stuff that we do at home. Because we feel like, as long as they got reading and math down, that's really like, that's the bulk of what you need. There's a lot of other stuff. Like my son loves science. My daughter loves art. So like, we're always like, how much science can we teach you? How much art can we let you, create with? And it's a lot of fun. And, we meet traveling families as well. I haven't read that book, but it would be a good one to read for me, because we have met other families in the process, and they refer to themselves as world schoolers. And what they do is they kind of either stay in certain places for a while, or they hop around to different locations, and they kind of travel in packs. And it's expats and people from different countries that are living the same lifestyle, and they try to stay in the same areas together, so then their kids can socialize, because socialization is a big aspect of like traveling with kids too. Like my wife and I just, we talk about like, man, this would be so different if we were single, but we wouldn't do it any other way now. And it's an experience that my kids will have and remember as they grow up and meet people. When you say you've been to so many different parts of the world, like I didn't get on a plane until I was 22, I think was the first time I got on a plane. And my kids have been to like 8 or 9 different countries now, maybe more. And, my daughter is only 8 years old. So it's kind of crazy to think that.
Yeah. I mean, that's like, you want, every generation wants the subsequent, like their kids to be better off and more worldly and more capable, more confident in navigating the world. And I'm like right there with you, like prioritizing your kids having like a lot of world experience. Like that's one of the things we try to save most of our money, but like to the extent that we use money, it's to take them out to have experiences. Like take them to Boston, for example, so they can see like the early colonial days of like the United States and stuff, or take them out to San Francisco so they can see where they were born and like get a feel for the city and stuff like that, right? So like little things like that. But I mean, the thing you said about getting on a plane at age 22, I would venture to say like many Americans, air travel is just a routine part of their childhood. Maybe they're traveling for like a soccer competition or something like that. And I think the fact that you didn't ride on a plane until you were 22 kind of speaks to the, relatively like hard early life you had. And I want to get into that. And I think now is as good a time as any, because it really informs a lot of who Dorian Develops is in my mind. Like my image of you as someone who, your mother immigrated from Cuba to the United States. Yeah. Cuba, of course, famously had a collapse. If you watch The Godfather Part 2, very dramatic retelling of what happened. But basically, that country went to hell, right? And a lot of people from Cuba got on ships and traveled to Florida and settled this area called Little Havana. And that's where you grew up, right? Like,
yeah.
Can you talk about your early years?
Yeah. So there was 2 big times in Cuban history when, like, basically, Cubans just left in mass exodus. And like my mom was from the first time back in the 60s, because my mom is older and she had me at an older age. And yeah, pretty much the whole family had to come. And I've heard the stories, you know, as I was a kid, where they were given like one personal item and told to leave, you know. And there was like a lot of my family that came from Cuba. We still have a small family. It's weird because like my mom, my grandmother, my uncle, and my grandfather, who I don't know but was, you know, alive when they came from Cuba, were kind of like the outcast of the whole family. And even though there was a larger family, they didn't really talk to us unless like someone had died, and then we get called for a funeral. And then mostly because like my grandfather, I guess, wasn't the best individual. And again, I didn't meet him; he was dead before I was born. But yeah, I you know, they lived in Miami for a while. My mom actually came from Cuba to Miami, and then she went to Vegas, and she came back to Miami when she was pregnant with me. She was living a very crazy life in Las Vegas. I won't get into too much details about that, but I know some of that history, and I haven't really talked too much about like my mom's like lifestyles. But when she came back to Miami to have me, because my grandmother was there, my uncle was there, it gave her like some better stability than what she had going on. She was still struggling with a lot of just you know, addiction, and like she came from Vegas when she found out that I was gonna be born, because she was 3 months pregnant. She had been partying, doing like cocaine and freebasing and drinking, and then found out she was pregnant with me and was like, oh, I gotta go get to see if he's gonna be okay. And then when she got positive results that I was healthy, she made a big decision, which, you know, I give her props, even though her and I don't have like the best relationship. That was a big thing for her to do, come to Miami and then eventually have me. But, you know, those demons stick around. And my mom was still like a heavy drinker when I was a kid, and she still struggled with her own problems, which wasn't good for me growing up. Luckily, I had a bit of stability with my grandmother and my uncle being like positive role models in my life. And then but it wasn't enough, you know. Also, like the area that I was in, if anyone's familiar with Little Havana or Alapata, I kind of lived on the line between Little Havana and Alapata. They're both pretty bad neighborhoods. Although Alapata is getting like gentrified now and it's become like the art district, it's still at the time when I was there, it was just like Cubans, Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, and it was like the 90s, and, you know, Latin Kings and disciples and gangs were just like a big thing in the 90s there in Miami, and it was a really rough neighborhood. And I went to a school in Little Havana that was, you know, even for a middle school, it was rough. And you know, I was kind of like a crappy kid for the most part. I hate to say that because you want to be like, no, kids are good, but I had a lot of bad influences, and I let them, you know, get the best of me, and I wanted to do bad stuff because I thought it was cool, and I was probably lashing out as a kid trying to get attention that I wasn't getting. And eventually I became a teenager who then became a criminal, right? By the time I was 16, just about to turn 17, I had already been arrested 4 times. You know, different things like assault and battery, disorderly conduct, grand theft auto, possession with intent to distribute, and like I was really just headed down a bad path. And I did make it into high school, and I was there for about 3 months before I dropped out at 9th grade. I was in a school at Miami Senior High, which is really, you know, everybody knows about Miami High in Miami, and I wasn't technically supposed to be there. Like I said, I lived on the cusp of Little Havana and Alapata, but I was worked into going to Miami High. And then when I got kicked out of there for fighting and different reasons, I got sent to the school that I was supposed to go to, which was Miami Jackson, which is a really rough school. Like, that school had bars that faced inward with motor grease on it to like prevent people from climbing out to skip school and stuff like that. Like, it was
Wow.
gnarly. And then I was just like, you know what? School's not for me. At that time, I was working like, gosh, I think I was working like a busboy job, because I always kind of had jobs, even though I did other dumb stuff. And yeah, eventually I was just like, I'm not going to do that anymore. And dropped out real young, kept getting in trouble. And then my mom was like, we're out of here. She always talked about going back to Vegas my whole childhood. And it was just like, most of the time it's just kind of like crazy drunk talk. And then one day we did it. She had her tax return saved up and like it was, I don't know, like looking back now, I think it's like crazy because she had like $3,000, which I realize is not a lot of money now. And yeah, we drove to Vegas and then, I lived there since I was 17 till 33. So I felt like I was born and raised in Miami, but then I kind of grew up in Vegas. So
yeah,
felt long-winded. I hope I answered.
No, dude, don't worry about being long-winded. Like, I mean, just that portrait of young Dorian being arrested repeatedly and lashing out. I think a lot of people can relate to that. I've had lots of people on the podcast who had relatively rough upbringings, but a lot of that was kind of like they did it to themselves, like in terms of like maybe they didn't have circumstances as dire as yours where they're literally greasing the bars on the school to keep people from climbing over and skipping school. I mean, like what kind of crazy environment is that to like what does that signal to kids? Like, we don't trust you to like be responsible adults. We're going to literally trap you in here as though this were a prison and you're going to be here for like 8 hours a day. Like it doesn't jive with me as an educator. Like I'm trying to figure out like the decision process. Yeah. So yeah, you're in Vegas, kind of like a clean break. You probably separated from a lot of like friends that were like bad influences and stuff like that.
Yeah, but old habits die hard. Kind of similar to my mom having struggles of like leaving Vegas, going to Miami for a better life, but still battling those demons that she had. I guess, weirdly enough, it's kind of like I kind of did the same thing when we went to Vegas. I didn't want to go to Vegas, even though I was coming off my last arrest, and my mom was able to work something out with my probation officer, where she got my probation cut early. And the last arrest that I had was a big one, like it was possession with intent to distribute, and it was for marijuana, but it was a large amount of marijuana that we were caught with, and she. Basically, I took that to court. I like it cost her money. It cost me a little bit of money because, like I said, I was working, and like we kind of beat that case to where I got it reduced, and I was on probation. And part of my probation was like you can't leave your home city and move across the country. But my mom was able to like talk it out with the PO and tell him like, hey. I'm going to move him to Las Vegas and I want to get him out of here because he's going to get in trouble. And he was like, all right, you get there and you send me a postcard. You contact me when you get there and I'll like drop it. But if anything happens, then, he's looking at being in a lot of trouble and that kind of worked out that way. But I didn't want to be there. I was reluctant to go. I loved my hometown, Miami, even though my life was crap at the time. I didn't see that. That was where I grew up. That was where my friends were. So when we went to Vegas, like I said, my mom had a small amount of money and she like prepaid for an apartment. And that apartment was like a 3-month lease or a mini lease that they just kind of took the cash up front. And when that money ran out, I wasn't trying to get a job. I wasn't trying to work. I wasn't really happy to be there. So it kind of put us into some struggles, and my mom was having a hard time getting a job, and I wasn't working. And then we eventually like got to the point where we slept in our car for a couple of days, and then I had made friends with a few people that eventually let us crash at their house. And I remember my mom and I like sleeping on their floor, to then like renting a room from somebody, to then eventually like I started working and kind of trying to get on, like my mom started working too, and we kind of started getting on our feet, and we rented a room for someone. Then eventually we rented from a weekly apartment that would charge you by the week, and then we eventually got our own apartment. But that kind of took some time. But that first year or so, man, it was still like even after that, I would say up until like 21 or so, I kind of got away from all the bad people I was hanging out with in Vegas. I still like trouble finds trouble, and like the friends I started making, the people that let us like sleep on their floor and rent a room from them were still not the best people, and there was still like a lot of drug use going on and a lot of just bad stuff that could have led me down the same path I was already on in Miami. But luckily, I just by luck, I didn't get pulled over at the wrong time, or I didn't do anything bad enough that would have got me arrested again, because at that point now I'm an adult and things would have been more serious. And eventually I was just like, I don't know, I was hanging out with like not the best people, and I was working a job, and I started like getting closer to 21, and I'm like, man, what am I doing? Like what am I doing with my life? Like I'm kind of hanging out with people that aren't doing much, and I'm trying to work, I'm trying to like save money, and I'm trying to like be a little bit better. And I just like I can't really do this anymore. So I started like distancing myself from friends, and by doing that, I feel like I just talked about this in a video, but I kind of decided to, like, I'm going to work 2 jobs. I ended up working like 16-hour days for 3 months, but that was actually really good because it distanced me from some of those friends that I would see after work. And I was just like, I consumed myself with work, which was waiting tables at the time and running food in the kitchen. And then eventually that led to a valet parking job in my early 20s, which I did that for a while. I was a valet bellman at a small boutique hotel, as they called it. And then eventually I, made different friends, started working for a valet agency. Time went on. I still struggled with drinking and smoking weed. Like that just kind of followed me my whole life. But I stayed away from like doing a lot of the hard drugs that I was like involved in when I was younger, like in Miami and those first couple years in Vegas. And then eventually I kind of grew up, met a girl. We started dating, and in my late 20s, decided to get married. By that point, I was working a decent restaurant job that made decent money, and my wife was a blackjack dealer, and she made good money. And anyone who's lived in Vegas knows that like people make careers out of those hospitality jobs, and we were able to kind of like get married and buy a house fairly young, just good timing. The market was just starting to bounce back. We bought a foreclosure. We had just got our credit just enough to get a FHA loan, and started growing up. But at that point, we hadn't even had kids yet. And
Yeah.
I guess I can get into like, that's when eventually we started talking about having kids. And then, one thing led to another, and we end up getting pregnant with our first child. And that's when I started looking into tech jobs and thinking about maybe changing careers, because I was getting sick of parking cars. And not that it's a bad job, but I didn't want my wife having to be a blackjack dealer and me be a parking cars at a strip club as our life goals,
Yeah, I mean, I think I spoke probably for a lot of people. I mean, like there are definitely plenty of jobs in hospitality that are like, seen as like terminal jobs, in the sense that like, okay, I've made it. I'm running an entire, hotel, right? Or I'm a chef at like this really good restaurant or something like that. But there's also a lot of jobs that are seen as kind of like steps towards something better, right? And I would imagine, being a valet car parker, or even a bellman, which is that like a higher rank than like the...
A bellman is just who carries your bags.
Okay.
There's bellman, doorman. So doormen stand at the door and like get your door, get you cabs, help you with things that you might need at the door. Then there's the bellman. That's the guys that deal with your luggage, take it to your room, take it from your car. And then valet. The hotel that I worked at was kind of like you were valet bellman, so you kind of did it both. And anyone who knows about like Vegas jobs, like, man, like being a valet attendant in Vegas, like at one point I think it's gotten bad now with Uber, and like there's just been a lot of change in Vegas since. But like at the time, it was a decent job to have. Like you made good tip money, and I did have a chance to eventually go into a management role. And at my valet bellman job that I worked at, I eventually became like the bell captain, which is basically the manager for the valet and bellman.
Okay.
And I had that job when I was too young to have that job. I was probably like 22 or 23 at that time. And I hated it. It was my first taste of management. And I realized that wasn't really something that I enjoyed doing. I was younger than everyone else there. They gave me the job because I had been working there longer than some people, and then the people that had seniority on me didn't want the job. And I kind of understand why now, because I didn't know any better, and they offered it to me, and it was kind of like, hey, you take it now, or we're gonna like put out a job rec for it and start interviewing people outside of the the hotel, and I was just like, all right, I'll take it. I'll take it. And then
Yeah.
I got a taste for what it's like to like have to manage people, and there's a bit of babysitting involved, and there's like listening to people's complaints, and then having to deal with people taking time off or just calling in sick, and then you gotta deal with getting shifts covered. And after I did that, I was like, I am never doing a management job again. I was like, why did I take on more responsibility for less money? Or essentially, that's what you do in some of those jobs, because like you can be a hotel manager, but the guy parking cars could a lot of the times. Back then we're making just as much money as the managers. So it's just like, why do so much extra work? Same thing in restaurants, right? I worked at a very high end steakhouse in Vegas, and the managers there were people who were waiters before and got moved into management positions. But a lot of the waiters, especially the ones that had the good sections and the good shifts, like they would make a lot of money, more than the managers would, and they would work 4 to 6 hours, and the managers would work like 10 hours. And it was it sounds like the lazy way to do it, but I was just like, I'd rather have more free time and not have to work as hard, and maybe not have a career out of this, but I'm happy with my tip money, and working 4 to 6 hours would sounded better than working 10 for the same amount.
Yeah, and like one of the things that strikes me from watching a lot of your videos and hearing you talk about like the nature of work, which working as a developer is similar. Like you can be an individual contributor. You can just say, okay, I'm checking in. Here's my work to be done. I'm going to be coding all day. I'll go to some meetings, and then I'm going to go home, right? But the manager has to like figure out how to coordinate. And they're probably also having to code and like, fix other people's code and do other stuff on top of just, their normal responsibility. So there's almost like this kind of like Faustian bargain, like you can either let people promote you to a manager, which sooner or later, if you're doing a good job, somebody will probably approach you and be like, hey, you should be the manager. And you can either like take that management, or you can become subjected to the management of whoever's foolish enough to take that job, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, do I want a bad manager, or am I willing to like become a manager so I don't have to deal with like a bad manager,
Yeah.
But I imagine like a lot of the people who become managers, like they're like, not the kind of people you want to give power to, and now you're reporting to somebody who's like, all pulling rank on you and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Did that happen a lot?
No, it does. It definitely does happen. For the most part, I think that some people that do become managers, I think there's a bit of like that stability aspect. I know people, at least in the waiting world of the restaurant world, it comes with. You can't wait tables forever, although there are people that do. Like I met 60-year-old waiters that have been waiters their whole lives, and they were career waiters. And I think eventually people move into those management positions because there is more room for growth and to make it a career, because many times you'll become like a supervisor of like a wait staff supervisor, and then you move into like a management role, and then you move into like a higher management role, and then eventually like you become the general manager. At the steakhouse that I worked at, there's a real like Cinderella story of the person who was the president of the company, and he started as a dishwasher. And just years and years and years of working for that company, he eventually from dishwasher to we didn't do busboys. Sorry, I don't know if I cut out there. My phone started ringing.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
We didn't do busboys, but it was waiter teams. But he eventually started as like the food runner. And because there was a back waiter and a front waiter, and then he moved up to a waiter, and then he moved up to like another position, and then eventually he was a general manager, and then next thing you know, he's in charge of 10 restaurants, and he's like the highest guy on the list. And when you hear stuff like that really is possible. And that was something that my mom knew about Vegas that sounded. It didn't sound real when she would tell me when I was younger, and it was just like, yeah, whatever. You're not going to go to Vegas and have no high school diploma, like no kind of experience doing any real jobs, and just become a waiter and then be set for life. But there was some some of that to it. Of course, you still had to work hard and you still had to do a good job, which eventually gets you promoted. Like I have a good friend of mine now who, he was fairly degenerate like I was, maybe not as bad as I was, but I met him when we first moved to Vegas, and he's a good buddy of mine. Still talk to him. He was he was at my wedding, but he has now moved his way up to, I want to say he's like assistant general manager of like the Palms Resort, which is like a kind of a big deal. And he started off same thing, like he was parking cars. I got him some of his first like jobs, and he's moved his way up the ranks, and now he's got like a good title, and eventually he'll become like the general manager, and he could continue to go up. And he's also a high school dropout, so there is potential there. But when you don't have like a lot going for you, like those are like your best case scenarios, and a lot of people don't end up like in a spot like that. But yeah, for me, it was just like, I don't know, I just didn't like the extra responsibility. You mentioned that with like software, and it's true. And there's kind of like a meme where people will tell you like the longer you work as a programmer, the less code you write. And it does seem like when you have more experience, you do become, like eventually you'll start mentoring some newer developers, and you might take like a junior developer under your wing. And then that's like a little more responsibility where you're kind of watching over someone else's code, and you're trying to help them write their code, which will cut into some of your time. And then you'll start getting more meetings because there's more higher level decisions that need to be made that don't really require you just sitting there writing code. You need to start talking about architectural decisions. You need these parts of hiring processes because you have more experience and you understand the code base better and the processes better. So middle management and upper management will want your input on a lot more things. And then eventually, like you said, you do kind of go into potentially a manager role or like a tech lead role where you become like the go-to guy for certain things. And then next thing you know, you're in way more meetings and you're like writing code very little. And it's like, hey, I started this to write code, and that's like what I enjoyed. And now I'm just kind of managing people, and I hardly ever get to write code. And when I do, I get interrupted.
Yeah. Manage your mind versus, creator mind, I guess. I can't remember the exact terms, but basically it's two completely different types of work. And if you want to be able to succeed, you have to like figure out a way to compartmentalize the two. Like I'll get a little bit autobiographical here and say that like I only check my email like 2 or 3 times a week because that's like manager mind stuff. And then when I do, I try to hit inbox 0. But I can't be like having notifications. You just got a new email. It just pulls me out of what I'm actually trying to do, which might be like, watching as many Dorian Develops videos as possible and researching and reading your blog and all that stuff. And then suddenly I don't want to, like I have 0 notifications on my phone. Even if people call me, I don't get a notification. I just call people back. And I know that's kind of like, people might be, oh, that's such an egotistical thing. Like you'll talk to them. They won't be able to talk to you, but like it works for me. One thing I want to emphasize though, is like you are a high school dropout, right? Like you dropped out in 9th grade. People who've listened to the podcast may know this about me, but I dropped out in 10th grade. I spent a year living in my car. Just eventually, made enough money working at grocery stores and stuff like that to basically be able to pay one of my friends so I could sleep on his floor. And just gradually kind of worked from there and, got the apartment and eventually was able to pay $1,000 a semester to go to a state university in the middle of Oklahoma that people probably haven't heard of. But it was a pretty good school in, 1999, 2000. And it was just extremely inexpensive. And from there, I went to China and pursued a lot of opportunity. But I want to emphasize that, like, just because you had success as a dropout, just because I've had success as a dropout, just because your friend had success as a dropout and has been able to climb the ranks at the Palm and probably has an illustrious career ahead of him. For those listening, I hope you all agree with this sentiment. Mr. T says, don't be a fool, stay in school. And I just want to emphasize that, like, please don't think like, if you're in high school listening to this, don't think like, oh, like they're giving me permission to follow my dreams and drop out of school. I do strongly recommend finishing school. I also strongly recommend going to college. So just because Dorian didn't go, I did go to college. I even got a graduate degree. Please Your mileage may vary, and we're not advocating anybody drop out of school. I just want to say that, like, again, just to make sure people don't get the wrong impression from us. So with that, you're working as a valet. You have this wife who's working as a blackjack dealer. Both are good, stable jobs in Las Vegas, and it may sound like weird, but Las Vegas is a weird place, right? It's a place in the desert that shouldn't exist. They've done all kinds of ingenious stuff with like water recycling and things like that to make the city viable. They have figured out all kinds of crazy attractions, like this big ball thing that like has images on it, like these amazing like fountain shows. You can just walk around the Las Vegas Strip and just see incredible, ornate, like, and incredibly garish architecture, and just like everything is crazy and amped up to 11 in Las Vegas. Like if you haven't visited Las Vegas, I don't gamble, and I strongly advocate that people don't gamble, but I mean, these are like temples of vice, basically. Like it's just like a monument to like human degeneracy, but it's like very interesting. And there's some really cool stuff in Vegas too. Like I went to the Pinball Hall of Fame. I don't know. Have you ever been over there?
Yeah, I used to live on Tropicana. So I would drive past it like when they first opened it up. I never actually set foot in there, but I know enough of it and I've seen enough pictures. Like I'm familiar with it, and it's actually supposed to be really cool.
It's so cool. So like they the owner takes like all the proceeds every year. I'm not sure if it's all of it, but like millions of dollars, and donates them to charity. And it's basically you walk in and you get some quarters, and it's reasonable. You spend like 50 cents to play pinball and stuff. Like it's not like some crazy like get a card so it confuses you as to how much you're spending and use credits and like walk around and like get a bunch of tickets. No, it's like all retro pinball machines. There are a few arcade machines there as well. But if you're in Vegas, definitely hit up the Pinball Hall of Fame. Yeah. It's a very cool city. My brother lived there for a while. So we did go out there quite a bit, and it's just unlike any other city I've ever been to. I mean, it might be the only city that's like that in the Western world. You might say like Macau or something in the Eastern world, or UAE. Yeah. I'm not sure what other places would be similar to that, kind of like desert paradise, so to speak. But that's the glitzy, like touristy perspective of Vegas. What was it actually like being kind of a working class, like hospitality worker?
So it's pretty funny, right? Because you think of Vegas, and a lot of people will be like, "Oh, I couldn't live there, man. It'd be too crazy." And there's some truth to that. Like there's like it's a very real thing when you meet friends who are addicted to gambling or alcohol, because it's just a 24-hour city. You can get a drink at 6 a.m. Like it's like there is no limit to how bad you can let it get. But I remember when I very early when I first moved there, like we were walking into a grocery store, because there's slot machines in grocery stores. Like you walk into Albertsons and there's a gambling section. And I remember hearing someone just kind of say out loud, like, "How am I supposed to buy groceries now?" And I was like, "Whoa, that's crazy. You came in here with grocery money and you put it in the machine, and now you don't have groceries." Like that's the reality
that's
of
hardcore.
Like what Vegas could be if you live there. But for most people, I will say that there's a lot of us that just kind of live regular lives, right? But since if you work in the industry, right? If you work in the nightclubs, if you work in the hotels, you kind of do everything like on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, right? Like industry night is usually like Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, because that's when most people would have their days off, because most people worked on the weekends, because most people work at the hotels. There are some corporate jobs there, and one of my first developer jobs was for Caesars Entertainment, which is like Caesar's Palace and all of the different hotels that they own. And like I worked a 9 to 5 when I got that job, and it was in the corporate office. But for the most part, the majority of people that live in Vegas work in the industry. But there are some things that do get somewhat like normalized. Like it's not rare for you to go out to like a bar and put money in a machine, because the bars are all lined up with video poker machines and ways to gamble, or like go bet on sporting events, because it's just accessible to you everywhere. Where like now, I remember when I first moved out of Vegas, there was like some UFC fights, and I was like, "Oh man, I wish I could bet on this fight." And I'm calling my buddy like if he was a bookie, and I'm like, "Hey man, go put some money on this fight for me." And I'm just like, "What am I doing?" But it's just like something that just comes very normalized.
It's normalized.
But,
like the act of gambling, which gambling is like I've seen a a lot of drug addiction, a lot of addiction to other bad things, but gambling is the thing that is just probably the most ruinous of all, because it destroys entire families, like financially, and I don't know if you want to talk about that, if you got any war stories.
So personally, I luckily have never gotten like, gambling was just something that I mean, I've lost some money, but I've never gotten into like financial troubles because of it. It's always been like a few $100 here or some extra money that I had that I probably shouldn't have gambled. And I always have the same feeling afterwards. It's that, why did I do that? I lost $100. I lost $200. I could have bought this thing that I wanted to buy that I've been saying I can't afford that, but then I go and gamble this away. And it always like, I never, like, there was only a couple times ever where I intentionally went out of my way to go gamble, but since it's just everywhere, anywhere you go, if you go out to go bowling, you walk through a casino, so then you end up like, all right, I'll play a little blackjack, I'll play some craps, and then it's like, crap.
Yeah.
Pun intended, or unintended, but yeah, like one birthday I was just like, I'm gonna have some fun, and then I gambled away like $500, and I remember just being like, that was so stupid. I really like could have used that money. And I've known people that friends of friends, acquaintances, where you hear those stories where it's just like, they had to leave because they couldn't continue living here because they just had such a bad gambling problem. And then there's different types of jobs that you'll see, like bartenders. They tend to really, it's probably one of the hardest jobs to have, especially if you work as a bartender in a bar that has gambling. Because there's a very common thing for you to like clock out of your shift and then walk around to the other side of the bar, sit down, order a drink, and start gambling like right then and there. Also, a lot of bartenders will also drink with their customers. They're at the big hotels, you won't see that, but you'll see that more in like smaller, like little bars, which it's so weird because, like, thinking about it, I'm like, gosh, that really isn't normal, but it just becomes kind of normal in Vegas, like
it becomes normalized just by virtue of it being pervasive everywhere. You wouldn't walk like, so just like, there have been lots of studies of like human beings, like you're walking through a parking lot and you've got like some trash in your hand and you're like, oh, there's a trash can over there, like, or I need to find a trash can for this. And you see a big pile of trash, and like, human beings, like, at least according to, like, they always do these psychological studies with like a bunch of university students and stuff, whoever they have on hand, and it's debatable whether these results are reproducible, but there are lots of studies, I think, that have shown that, like, if people see a bunch of trash lying around, they'll be less inclined to go find a trash can somewhere and just to throw their trash onto the pile of existing trash. And like little things like that, when you're constantly, swimming through slot machines and things like that are designed to like take your money basically and give you, like, it's always like a net zero or a net negative expected value whenever you're gambling. Basically, they're the only skill intensive games in Vegas, like poker and blackjack, I guess, if you use like, there's some great videos. I'll share a video about like advantage blackjack or whatever, but keep in mind, I have never gambled. Like, I've never gambled with my money, and I'm too scared to even try it because I'm somewhat compulsive, and I'm deathly afraid that next thing you know, I'm running some sort of crypto scam or something like that to try to like get money so that I can gamble more. Because it seems like a lot of scammers and a lot of things, like, it goes back to they got addicted to gambling, and that's why they need these incredible amounts of money to be able to survive, because they're just hemorrhaging money everywhere they go because they're like, degenerately betting on sports. And I've watched some crazy movies about this. They're Casino, of course, Martin Scorsese movie. There's like a TV series called Lucky from like
haven't seen
2010 or something. It was only like 13 episodes. You can find it on YouTube, but it's about like this gambling addict that lives in Las Vegas, and it's starring the guy from Sex and the City, the tall guy, Aiden, the Aiden character from Sex and the City. My wife watched that show when she was in college, so that's how I know that. But I don't want you to think like I'm winding at the end of the day watching Sex and the City. It's not my cup of tea. But that guy, like he's like a World Series of Poker champion and stuff, and he proceeds to just gamble, like destroy his life over and over again. Yeah. and I'm not, obviously that's a work of fiction, but there are plenty of works of, like essays and stuff about like the corrosive effect of gambling. And yet, people are going to gamble, right? Like that's just how it is. And the fact that there's like this legally sanctioned place where it can be regulated, some people may argue that's a good thing. But you were like right there in the belly of the beast and seeing bartenders who were, clocking out and going straight to the video poker and stuff like that. And then you ultimately worked for one of the biggest, gambling conglomerates, I guess, as a software engineer. Can you talk about like, was that one of your first? Okay,
that was my first job. Yeah, as a
okay,
dev.
well let's talk. I want to talk about your learn to code journey, and I don't want people to think like, oh, Quincy's just going to spend the entire podcast like expounding upon vice and how gambling is bad and things like that. Like you do you, but like it's not a net positive expected value. Like the house always wins, right? Like otherwise there wouldn't be these giant buildings that cost millions and millions of dollars to build. Like they were built for a reason. It's a business for a reason. It's not like a charity. It's not like you're going to a food bank and getting free money or something, right? Like they and it is studied to, they've got PhDs in human behavior, like basically figuring out more ways that they can get you in a Skinner box and like part you with your money, right? And they've got financial engineers figuring out new legal ways that they can get you to like sign over more and more of your future and go further into debt. And it's terrifying that this stuff exists, but it exists. But what we're here to talk about is your journey into coding. And not every single job you've done has been at a casino company. Like you've done a lot of other work and stuff like that. But because you were in Vegas and those were the employers there, let's talk about kind of like your journey. Sorry, I'm like really trying to tee this up for you.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so my learn to code journey was interesting. So it didn't start with coding, actually. Like it started with me trying to get into networking. What happened was my wife had a friend who came to visit for DEF CON, which if you're familiar with DEF CON, they actually hosted DEF CON at the hotel that I worked at as a valet bellman for almost the entire, like from the inception of DEF CON up until they moved to I think it was the Rio where they first went to. I don't know where they're holding it now, but DEF CON is this hacker convention, and they come in there and they rent the place out, and they hack, they try to break in the stuff. I remember when I worked at that hotel, they would like hack the TV system, and they would hack like everything, and it was just like there was this one rule that it was just like you are not allowed to hack like our financial stuff. Like you can't hack our actual computer system, but other than that, they allowed them like free reign. And one year there was actually
one famous thing about DEF CON. If you want to go to DEF CON, if you can figure out how to sneak into the event, like or like print, like fabricate like something, they have really good security, as you can imagine. If you can figure out a way to get into the event without paying, they will just let you in. That's like part of, but you have to disclose like how you got in so that they can patch that so other people. So next year somebody will have to find some new vulnerability to attack.
That's fun. That's fun. Yeah. I would watch what they did. It's funny because from the time that I was familiar with what DEF CON was, because I worked the event, or I worked at the hotel that held the event, to the time that I actually decided to learn something about software was like I hadn't been at that hotel for a long time, and I only knew of DEF CON because I had worked it, and then my wife's friend who came to visit was there visiting for it. And I'm like, oh, I remember DEF CON, and they have a game they call Spot the Fed, because they have actual like FBI goes there to kind of like see what they're talking about, and they're undercover for the most part. So they'll play this game called Spot the Fed, where if you're able to spot out the FBI agent or guess who might be an FBI agent, like they give away prizes and stuff like that. And one year I wasn't working there, but I heard from security, they actually busted this like big hacker who was there for the event, and he had hacked into some banking systems in Europe, and like the FBI busted him at DEF CON. So it's wild. So my wife's friend is visiting for DEF CON. He's not a hacker, but he goes there to party with all his buddies that all work in some form of hacking. And he kept saying, man, you got to learn Linux. That's which is like, looking back now, is like, that is the most vague thing that you can tell someone. Like, while you could tell someone, hey, yeah, learn Linux, when you actually start learning Linux, you're like, what do you, like, the operating system? Like, what do you mean learn Linux? But that's the advice he gave me, because all of his friends from DEF CON, they had some knowledge of Linux, and he just, I guess from, that secondhand information, he's like, I just keep hearing them say that they know Linux, so you should learn Linux, which that eventually led me down like this rabbit hole of like, let me look into this stuff. And then I had another friend who was actually, he worked cybersecurity, and he had a background in that. He was ex-military, and he worked for the Department of Energy, and he's the one that kind of gave me a little bit better of a roadmap. And he was like, you need to go get your CompTIA certs. He's like, if you want to like work your way into this stuff, you need to start with the A+, get your Net Plus, and get your Security Plus, and then like then you can kind of like figure out where you're going to go from there. So I end up starting to study for the A+, and I brain dumped for like 6 months. I overstudied. I passed. I was worried because it cost like $250 per test, and the CompTIA is like 2 tests, so it would have been like close to like $500. It might have been a little less than that, but I didn't want to fail it. So I'm at the strip club where I park cars, and at this point in time, I'm watching videos. I have flashcards of the questions that I might get asked, and I'm like studying flashcards in between cars that I'm parking, and I eventually get my CompTIA A+, and then I start looking for, like, I try to start looking for jobs in the process of me going and starting to learn my Net Plus for the next cert. And then I start like going down the rabbit hole of like possibly learning Cisco certifications and the CCNA and like the different certs that could eventually get me to like a network engineer job. And at this point, I'm just getting really bored of it. I start studying like IP addresses and subnet mask, and like, how different packets are transferred over the internet. And I'm just like, this is so boring. And I'm like just studying to pass a test, which like nobody really likes to. Maybe there are some people out there that might enjoy that, but like studying to pass a test is not fun.
Andrew Brown on the FreeCodeCamp channel, he's passed like more than 50 certification exams. He's like a former CTO who just like loves taking tests, and if you're familiar with the FreeCodeCamp YouTube channel, you'll see like every month or two we'll have a new Andrew Brown course where he's got like a comprehensive like 10-15 hour video that basically teaches you everything you need to know to pass XYZ cert. Now I don't know if he has them for like, I think we do maybe have some CompTIA specific ones, but the CompTIA is like a huge certification with a huge corpus of knowledge that you need to learn. Whereas Andrew Brown mostly covers like certifications focused on like Azure cloud certifications or AWS cloud certification. Sorry, I didn't mean to disrupt your flow.
No,
but I did want to point out there's at least one human being on Earth who really likes taking tests and earning certifications. He's got to catch them all.
He's got to be like the only one. Actually, my brother-in-law, who's an electrician, he's actually a licensed master electrician in like almost 40 states, and he's going for every state. And
that's crazy. Why? He's just
there's like, he's able to like get work by basically being the licensed electrician on staff. So there's like companies that will pay him to consult for them, basically, because they need to have a licensed electrician on staff. And so it's like a whole side hustle. I don't know how much of a gray area it is, so I don't want to like let out too much, but he's been doing it for a while, and it's like his retirement plan. And even my wife's family, they come from a long line of electricians. Like their dad was an electrician. That's how they became electricians. So her dad has even completed a few of the certifications to be a master electrician in different states. And I think he's actually on the payroll for a couple companies that kind of, send them some money every month just to be on their list of electricians, because they need to have a master electrician, and it's kind of hard to find master electricians. So
yeah,
he studies certs all the time, and he's familiar with like the process, because I was kind of telling him my story a little bit, and he was like, oh yeah, he's like, that's kind of how I have to do my test, where you go and you show your ID, and they kind of have a camera on you, and you have to be at the computer to make sure you're not cheating. And that's how they do it for like the CompTIA certs too. I forget what what the name of that company that kind of runs those testing things.
It's called CompTIA.
CompTIA, no, but there's like is it Pearson VUE?
Oh, you're talking about the actual like
the
test
company
proctoring.
that,
There's
yeah,
I think Pearson VUE, Longman,
there's a few of them.
I'm trying to remember some of the other names, but it doesn't matter. But basically, there are these companies that do like proctoring, and a lot of those, like, you know, the way FreeCodeCamp is developing proctoring is it's, you know, human proctored, but we just have like, you know, AI watch the video and then flag it for like a human to look like, oh, it's really weird. But like, there have been a lot of, just total side note, there have been a lot of people on like Reddit, on Twitter, who are like, I got failed for this exam and I did not cheat. Like, why did they, you know, fail me on this exam? Now I've got to retake it. It's humiliating. And like, I spent all this time, I spent all this money, and they think I cheated, but I didn't actually cheat. I was just like a false positive in their system. And I will say that FreeCodeCamp, when we roll out those kinds of exams, which we're going to announce in a, you know, probably around our 10th birthday, which might have actually already passed by the time this goes live. But I want to emphasize there will always be a human in the loop. And yeah, since these certifications are free, you don't lose any money, even if you did, you know, get if we did get a false positive. But we should never get a false positive because we're going to err on the side of caution. Anyway.
Nice.
So, sorry for the segue about that. But yeah, there's
totally
like there's a huge industry of professional kind of like test proctoring. So you can sit on your computer. You don't have to report to a test center like you used to have to. A lot of this was accelerated by COVID.
Yeah.
But back to your story. Sorry.
You're good.
I can't help
I feel
myself.
like I could easily digress too, because I'm like, oh, he does a lot of continuous education where he has it like, as he's on his phone watching videos, occasionally it'll ask him for a picture just to show that he's actually there, and made me think of like the different process that they try to do for like these remote learning platforms.
Yeah.
But, to just go back to what we were talking about.
Prometric is the thing that I couldn't say earlier, but that's another big company. Sorry.
Gotcha. No worries. Yeah, no worries. So then I find myself, if you ever seen the CCNA book for Cisco, it's like this thick. I mean, it's it's like just for those listening to the audio, it's like your full grip, like your thumb to your index finger if you were to stretch out your hand. It's like it's like a dictionary. On my personal Instagram, which I don't share and I don't think anyone knows, there's actually a picture of when I was studying from like 2016 where I'm like sitting on my hammock and I have that book on my lap, and it looks like a phone book. And anyone who's not over 35 probably doesn't know what a phone book is anymore. But it's just massive. And you know, I'm watching videos, I'm studying for this thing, and I'm just like, I don't want to do this anymore. I just started to get super bored of it. And then like a buddy of mine that I worked with at the time at the strip club at the Spearmint Rhino, which if you're familiar with Vegas, it's like the, you know, most famous strip club in the world. And we're parking cars there, and you know, he's kind of a tech guy. His cousin owned like a computer repair, you know, to your door kind of service. And, you know, I was trying to get a job with him, and I had my A+, and like the only person that called me back was Geek Squad. And, you know, not to down talk
Geek
anyone,
Squad is like Best Buy's IT support.
Yes. But at the time, like I'm making really good money working 3-4 days a week, parking cars. And like Geek Squad would have been such a downgrade in pay for me that I couldn't, like, it just made no sense for me to take that job. Like I could not say like, oh yeah, I'm going to quit my valet job and go work at Geek Squad, even if it was part-time, but I couldn't get any work with the A+. So I was like kind of forced to keep studying, and I didn't want to do it. And I'm talking to my buddy who's the tech guy, who kind of was not the guy that came from DEF CON, but the guy that I worked with that was just into tech, and he saw me studying for these certs, and he was just like, why don't you learn how to code, man? He's like, you'll love it. And like, me and him were like, we worked together almost every day. So he kind of knew my personality. He saw how hard I was studying. He saw me there with flashcards in between like parking cars. And he's like, dude, you'd love it. He's like, I've got a Udemy course that I've started, and this and that. And the whole time I'm like, no, I'm going to do this. No, I'm going to do this. And then finally, like one day I'm starting to think like either this is what actually happened, or I can't remember now because it was so long ago. He's like, dude, here's my login information for my Udemy. He's like, you don't have to pay for it. Like, it's your Friday. Go and just watch a few videos. And it was a Ruby on Rails boot camp on Udemy. And I started with the HTML and CSS stuff on there, and then like one thing led to another. And then I got to like the JavaScript portion. I was like, oh, it got too complicated for me, but I liked it. I was like, oh, this is actually kind of cool. And then like I ended up buying a few other Udemy courses. I eventually found freeCodeCamp, which became like like one of my primary learning resources throughout my learning process, because it took me like almost a year worth of studying, like almost every day, of learning how to code to get there. I remember right before the interview for my like first dev job, I remember the night before I was doing the whole like beginner portion of the JavaScript on freeCodeCamp, which is, it's funny like talking to you now, but like that was in 2017, and I was just was about to turn 33. My son was born. My daughter was already born, because I started learning about like the Net Plus and all the CompTIA stuff as my wife was pregnant with our firstborn. And then when I switched over to learning how to code, my next baby was born, and we had our first kid that was already like 6 months old. And it's funny because, as a disclaimer, like, don't go thinking that having kids is the solution to you getting your life together, but it really made me want to like do better. And because now I felt like I had like, I had human beings that I needed to take care of, and I couldn't keep goofing around. And if it wasn't for, my wife getting pregnant and thinking like I need to be able to support my family, I don't think I would have ever gone down the path of trying to like learn how to code. So yeah, like I could talk a little bit about like my actual like learning the code process, because it wasn't as simple as like, oh, I got a couple of Udemy courses and then I did freeCodeCamp, because it was a big grind. So when I went after doing like the Udemy course and then like picking up a couple different courses, anyone who's self-taught and has successfully like gotten a job as a developer will know that like early in your learning, if you don't have like good mentorship, or you don't have like a solid like back then it was harder too. There was very little resources that really like gave you the path laid out, and I think freeCodeCamp did a really good job of that. And there was other paid resources that I used, but I refused to like pay too much money for anything. So I did do like Team Treehouse at the time, and I did do like Codecademy, and I did like other like I even tried the Odin project for a little bit, and I have videos where I'm like which one's better, Odin project or freeCodeCamp? And I think like they're both very good resources, and I often recommend free resources because it's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking that you have to pay to like be successful as someone who's learning how to code. And we have that idea that if we pay for something, it has more value than something that's free. But there are some amazing free things out there, and I usually try to recommend things that are free or affordable. I try to stay away from really expensive learning curriculums and programs, because I feel that like it's not very necessary. So my process took about 10 months. The first 3 months was really like just fumbling around. At that point I started with that Ruby on Rails course, and then I jumped into PHP at one point, and then I was trying to find the glass slipper. There's another Cinderella reference, but I was trying to find what I like to learn with. And then after a little while I started to realize like, oh, I don't need to find like one thing to learn from, because after you do 5 HTML courses, you kind of start seeing that they're all really teaching you a lot of the same things. And the same is true for CSS or JavaScript or React. Like once you realize that they just keep kind of teaching you a lot of the fundamentals and the basics, and then you can get into more advanced stuff that could teach you new things. When you start going back and you get into that tutorial hell loop where you're going back and you're relearning stuff that you've kind of already learned, but you feel that you have to know it better in order for you to move forward and to really understand it, and you don't realize that like the learning actually happens from the building part, and you only see that in hindsight. And I see that now. But eventually I did a bunch of courses. I finally started like building stuff, and then I started watching YouTubers. There wasn't a lot of YouTubers at the time that kind of talked about this stuff, but a lot of people would say like, oh, go network, go network, go network. So I found like a meetup in my area, and it was crazy because I remember I worked some crazy shifts at the club. I would work what we called the morning shift, which was you go in at 2 a.m. and you'd either get out early at 10 a.m. or you'd be the late guy that stayed till noon until the day shift guy came in and replaced you. So I would on Friday nights I would go in at 2 a.m., which was technically Saturday morning, and I would stay there until noon, and then the meetup was like right at noon in downtown, which was fairly close to where the club that I was at, where I worked at. So I would just like have a change of clothes and be completely sleep deprived. And every other Saturday, there would be a meetup. And I would go there jacked up on Red Bull and coffee and like go into these meetups for coding. And the one that I would go to often was called Demo Day. I eventually went to a React meetup, which kind of like led me to my first job. But I would go to Demo Day, and I remember going there the first time and having like my freeCodeCamp portfolio, or I think you guys still have it, but it's like one of the very first things that you build, that it's just like a picture, a blurb, and then like a couple sections. At the time, this was like 2017, so it was a while ago. I know the curriculum's changed a lot, and the projects that you guys have changed a lot, and that's kind of what I show. Like I got there, and the coordinator was like, "Hey, what are you gonna show us today?" I was like, "I'm not showing you guys nothing. I am sitting right back here." And he's like, "No, it'd be fine. Just show us what you'd be working on." And I'm super embarrassed and like, I shouldn't even be here. It's kind of like the way I was thinking, right?
If it's
like
your first night at Fight Club, you have to fight.
Yeah, that's exactly what it felt like. And I'm like, all right, I guess so. And it's just like, it's just a portfolio HTML CSS thing I've been working on, like nothing cool. And I was like one of the first people that went up to, and there was, I don't know, like 30 people there. So it wasn't like two people I was presenting to. It was quite a few people, and I had this old shit. I don't want to cuss. I had this
fine.
Really
don't worry about it.
Crappy laptop. I mean, it was so bad I had installed Linux on it, and the only reason I installed Linux on it was because of my wife's friend who told me I needed to learn Linux. And it was good because it actually made that laptop run again. But I remember I had to use it with a big cooling tray because I was just like too cheap to buy a new one. I probably could have bought anything else but that, but I was like, this is going to be like, I'm going to hold this as a thing of pride. And I kept it for a really long time. I actually have a video that I recorded where I was like, this is the laptop I learned to code on. And when I open it, one of the keys falls off. And that wasn't like something I did for that video. That key was really, it was like the W key, I think. That key was really busted. And I just kept it on there, and anytime I lifted it up or flipped it upside down, that key would fall off. So that's the laptop I have that I'm trying to present on. And the guy that's running the show, he's a professional developer at the time. He was also self-taught. He ended up becoming like a pseudo mentor, but he lets me use his MacBook, and it's like the first time I touched like a brand new MacBook Pro, and it was like all silvery and smooth, and I have like this monster of a laptop that I sit the MacBook Pro on top of, and it's like this 17-inch laptop that I used to have that I played WoW on.
I know how they are. Like they've probably got like the plastic exterior, and the fans like super loud.
Awful. It was an HP. It was just terrible, and it's like, I think of it as a badge of honor now because, man, I was embarrassed to be there. And like, not only did I not feel like I shouldn't be there just because I'm just some dude. I literally got off of work from parking cars, and like, there's all these real developers here. There were people that were learning too, but like, I felt like I had no right being there. And dude was super nice. And then, like, I always tell people, you'll be surprised because that's kind of like the experience that a lot of people have whenever they go to a meetup. It's like everybody's really nice, and we developers, we love to talk about tech and stuff that people are working on. So even if you feel like your portfolio is this crappy little HTML CSS website, I guarantee you, like I'll geek out and I'll be like, oh, you should use this or you should fix this. And then like I have design chops now, so I would like give you pointers on like how you could redesign it. And I've had a few one-on-one calls where I have done that, where like we open up the code. One of the guys that I'm helping and mentoring and meeting up with Izzy, he's been learning and he's crushing it. Like he's doing it like almost like a full-time job. And like, I love geeking out over that stuff. So like, if you go to a meetup and you feel like how I felt, that you just don't belong there, you'll be surprised how quick people are like really nice and helpful. So I get up on the stage, I show off my crappy little portfolio website that I'm like probably a little too proud of, but also ashamed of at the same time, because it's like, I built this with my bare hands. You know, this was a blank HTML page. And afterwards, like, I got some feedback. And I remember, I think it was that very first meetup, there was this startup that was based out of Vegas. They were doing stuff with the IBM Watson at the time.
The old AI, the original kind of like OG,
way before
overhyped.
ChatGPT. Yeah, way overhyped. But they were a startup, and they were like known for being like the startup, because eventually Zappos ended up like headquartering in downtown Las Vegas. And I mean, the tragic story about the founder of Zappos. He had a pretty wild life, and it goes back to like the stuff we talked about with how Vegas can be, and it's just an example of that. It's a shame, but like, there was a little bit of a tech scene in Vegas that started to happen, and the CFO, or not the CTO of that startup, I believe he was there, or he might have been at the second one that I went to, but he gave me like a card, and he was like, when you're ready, email this assistant of mine, and maybe we can get you like an interview. And I was like, what? I got an interview off of
Your
that?
first meetup?
Yeah. But the thing is, I was not qualified for that job at all. It was actually, they had a pre-vetting process. They worked in Haskell, which is a very like kind of an obscure functional programming language that not too many people know about unless you're like a real geek or you just know, you've heard of it. And
I think it's used in like telecommunications or something like that.
Yeah, it's also I believe Cardano, which is a crypto that I kind of like, is written in Haskell, if I'm not mistaken. I hope I didn't misspeak on that, but it's a pretty. So the thing about Haskell, they tell you like if it's got such a good compiler, like if it passes compile, then your code is safe, because it's just like a very safe programming language with a lot of like. You can't really make a mistake if it's compiling. Like your code's probably solid if it passes. But I didn't know much about Haskell. I still don't know much about Haskell. But I went down this sidetrack. Again, it happens when you're first learning how to code, because I have this opportunity to like interview for a real company with a real job. And it's like, looking back now, I realized what some of the questions were, but at the time I had no idea. I was in over my head. It was actually. One of the first ones was FizzBuzz, and if you're familiar with FizzBuzz, it's just a very simple algorithm. It's hard to even call it an algorithm, because it really is just like a couple if-else statements for where like if it's divisible by 3, you print fizz. If it's divisible by 5, you print buzz. If it's divisible by both, you print FizzBuzz. Right? Like it's actually really simple once you have a okay understanding of programming. But at the time I didn't know what I was doing. I ended up going on one of those freelancing websites. It might have been like Freelancer, and I found like a tutor to try to like help me pass this thing. And for like 2 weeks I tried to like pass this interview, prereq coding test with like 3 different algorithm challenges. And then like that was kind of like disheartening, and I felt like, I'm not gonna get this. And it kind of it luckily I stuck with it, because I realized that like, there's going to be more opportunities there. And that happened through going to more meetups and continuing to learn. Like I got sidetracked and started learning Haskell for a little bit. But then when I realized that I wasn't ready, I kept going back to freeCodeCamp. I kept going back to web development, and I kept like going back to the stuff that I was learning. And then I started like learning React. It's still like a very similar path now. You learn your HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then you start learning your front-end library or framework. And then, then you can start learning a little bit more about CRUD, and you start learning about backend, and you start learning about databases. And it's very overwhelming when you start. And as you continue to progress through your learnings, you start to feel a little bit better about it, because you start retaining some of the information and things start to make sense. And I remember going to my first React meetup, and they did that one like every 2 weeks, and it was all real cool, real developers that I was around. And another place that I felt completely out of place, because I had just started learning React, and I saw that meetup, and I was like, I had already been going to that other demo day meetup, so I was just like, I felt comfortable enough to just show up. And it was like they had free pizza there, and it was just like, why not? And I met with the coordinator, and he was super cool. And he starts telling me about React, and I'm like, hey, I'm just learning. I know a little bit of this, a little bit of the basics, and I want to like start really learning React. And I've been watching a few videos, but I haven't started yet. And he starts telling me that I should do a messenger clone, like a Facebook Messenger clone, and he starts just talking tech, and I'm like, my eyes glazed over, and everything he's saying is just like, I'm overwhelmed. I'm like, I don't know any, like it felt like he was speaking another language. He's showing me code, and he's like just getting into the weeds of it. And I know that I do that now with like people who are newer, but like he was still super nice, and I kept showing up to that React meetup. Eventually, that React meetup was the meetup that led me to meet the recruiter that got me my first job. And the first meetup at Demo Day, the guy that became kind of my pseudo mentor, that was the coordinator that made me kind of go up on stage the first day, I became such a familiar face that like they knew that I was serious about learning. And it worked out very interestingly, because I had an interview for the job at a smaller insurance startup of the coordinator for Demo Day. His name was Mike Zeflo. I think he's still like involved in the community too. And I had an interview for a job at his company that he set up for me. At this point, I had already been learning for like 10 months. And at that Friday, so that interview would have been on Monday. That Friday, I got a call from the recruiter saying that like Caesars Entertainment wanted to follow through with me after I had interviewed twice with them. And that interview process was like, after working there, I realized that it was just kind of like they take forever to hire, but it was very nerve-wracking for me, because the recruiter kept telling me that they liked me from the interviews, but from the first interview to the last interview to getting the offer was like a 3-week process. And I was just like, I don't know what to do. I've got this other job. In hindsight, I wish I would have still gone and interviewed that Monday for the other job, because I don't know if that would have been a better path in. But nonetheless, I ended up from Meetups getting a job. And it was at the React meetup where I met that recruiter randomly. She had bought pizza for everybody and gave out our business cards. And it was so funny, because I remember now all the experienced developers were there like, oh, headhunters, damn recruiters. They're like, oh, at least we got free pizza. And I'm like, yeah, I'll take your business card. Yeah, I'm going to email you. And I did. And it just happened to be like just the perfect timing, when preparation meets opportunity, right? Like they were hiring for a junior developer. I had learned just enough. I really crushed it on the first interview. After I got hired, I talked to the people that hired me, and like the lead dev was a self-taught developer, so he kind of like he took a liking to me because of that. And then like they told me, they were like, dude, you interviewed better than other people that had experience. And I don't know. I think it was just I studied enough, and I was probably over prepared. I was, like I said, the night before, I'm redoing freeCodeCamp curriculum and like trying to make sure I know everything I need to know. And there were still things that in the interview process I messed up. And then after like becoming friends with the people that hired me, and going out for a couple beers back when I used to like still drink, and like talking it out with them and being like, why did you guys hire me? Do you realize you made a mistake? And they're like, no, dude, you're good. You're like that. Having that insecurity of just like being a dropout, and like I shouldn't be a programmer. I shouldn't. This isn't something like this was not in my cards. I still have very bad imposter syndrome, and still believing that I'm not good enough to do the job. And I still struggle with that now after I've done it professionally, and I know that I know how to do the job, and I know like what a bad developer looks like, and I know what a great developer looks like, and I know that I'm somewhere in between there, but I still struggle with believing that this is something that I was able to accomplish. And that first 6 months at the job was rough, because there was so much imposter syndrome, and there was a lot of politics going on in that office, and there was just a lot of stuff where like my lead that hired me couldn't devote as much time to me as he wanted to, because he was overworked, and it was really hard. But I learned so much, because there was a bit of an overworked culture there. And as bad as it sounds, I almost think that that's good for people who are just getting started. And it's toxic. It's not really good, but man, you sure do learn a lot when you're in a work environment that is like pushing you to learn. And we can get into that too. I feel like
I mean, like the military, right? Like it's hard to think of something more toxic than having a drill sergeant barking orders at you while you're like you barely slept and you probably smell terrible and you're out in some strange camp in the wilderness doing all these grueling physical things, but like the U.S. government has hit upon that, and probably most other governments have hit on like putting people through this brutal rite of passage. They can learn a lot, right? So, if you have the luxury of putting yourself into the frying pan, so to speak, I imagine you can forge quite a bit of knowledge and experience very quickly. But it's not for everybody, and it's not the only way. but
no,
it's heartening to hear that like even though you were in like a toxic kind of high pressure, long hour type work culture that would be totally not out of place in places like Asia, but would be very out of place in Europe and to an extent maybe in North America. Like I'm glad you were able to make the most of it and get the most out of it. And I'm also glad you look back with kind of mixed feelings, but you can see the good and not just the bad.
For sure. And that's kind of what I take from it, because I do think that there was, like you said, trial by fire, into the frying pan. Like I did learn a ton. And at that point, like I had already, so you got to imagine, right? Like learning to code for me was something that I took with a bit of my extreme personality that I applied to a lot of things in my life that weren't good until I applied it to something that was like programming. And I was learning, like when I say I learned how to code in 10 months, like you hear stories of people that do it in 3 months or 6 months. And like, I still think 10 months was an impressively short amount of time, but I was waking up in the morning on my days off, and I would open my laptop and I would close it at night after being on there for 16 hours sometimes. And that whole time I was on my laptop, I was watching videos, following along with tutorials, building, coding, and like every waking moment of my life for those 10 months was learning how to code. And that's not healthy. I like I said, like that's a bit of an extreme personality type on my end, but like I stopped hanging out with people. I stopped going to jiu-jitsu. I stopped going to the gym. Like I basically just consume my entire life with like, I am going to get a job doing this thing. And the only way for me to do that is that I have to prove myself that I am capable of doing this against people who have college degrees, against people who have experience, against people who have a boot camp under their belt. And there was many times through that process where I was doubtful that it was going to happen. And I remember, along with like telling my wife, where like, hey man, one day we're gonna be able to travel the world if I can do this. And also telling her, like, I remember being like, look, like just kind of like give me a chance to do this. It was a stressful time. Like we had a newborn. Eventually she was expecting another kid, and I'm sitting on my computer all day, and I'm like, just give me some time to do this. I'm going to work as hard as I can. If I can't do it by X amount of time, like we'll reconsider our options. And I was like, there was something that I told myself. I was like, I am going to like get so good at this that somebody is going to come across me and be like, I have to hire that guy. Right? Like I can't let this guy get away from me, because I was willing to work for cheap, and I knew that I would be willing to work as hard as I could to do the job. So with that mindset, it was a bit of a pitfall of my own when I got the job eventually and realized that I shouldn't have continued to be like that, because what I was doing was that I felt like I didn't know enough. I went into a stack that I had no idea of. Like we were using Kotlin at the time, but it was a Java/Kotlin backend. It was AEM, which is a weird CMS that like there's no information about on the internet because it's proprietary through Adobe, and they probably have more info now, but back then there was even less. And then there was a bit of toxic work culture, not because of the developers, but because of the management, which then affected the developers. And I saw how hard my lead was working, and I saw how hard other devs were working, that I was like, I got to go home and I got to get better. Like I have to be as good as these guys were, which is, as a junior developer, you shouldn't think like that, because as long as you're putting in the time, and the whole idea is like you spend all this time studying so then you can do it as a job, because then that's when you'll really learn, because now you'll do it 8 hours a day and you'll be paid to do it and it'll be easier. But I for my own personal reasons and my personality type and my imposter syndrome, I was like, I gotta get better faster because I'm gonna get fired. And I didn't feel like I belonged there in the first place. And I thought they made a mistake when they hired me. But man, did I learn a lot. By my second year by the end of my first year of being a dev professionally and having almost 2 years from when I started learning how to code, like I could tell, like looking back now, I was like, I might not know algorithms. I might not know some things that might make me a better developer or what people would think of as like a really like a great developer. But for like someone who didn't go to school and like felt like they had no excuse doing this job, like I feel like, yeah, like there was a point in time where I kind of looked back and I was like, man, I kind of know a lot of stuff financially, which is crazy because everybody knew where I had worked at previously when they hired me as a developer. For almost a year, I kept one night at the club and I kept it secret from my managers and like the developers I worked with because I didn't want them to think that I couldn't do the job. But I wanted to try to like catch up money wise. We had some debt and like that extra night at the club was good money. And I was just like, so I'm working a 9 to 5, working after hours on development tasks from work. And then Friday night comes, I go home at 5 o'clock, I take a nap, I wake up at 1 a.m. and then I go work at 2 in the morning till 10 a.m. or noon on Saturday morning. And I did that for like, God, it was like 8 or 9 months. It was the better part of a year until I was finally like, I can't do this anymore. And I started giving away the shift, but I didn't want to get rid of it because it was like, I still had like, I was like, if all else fails, I can always go back to parking cars. And I was scared because I felt like if I get fired, at least I can go back to the job at the club. But then I finally realized that they weren't going to fire me and I was there to stay. But that almost took a year. So it was just funny. And I don't know, it's just something there. They found out. Eventually I told them like 5 months in, after I felt comfortable with all the guys I was working with or the devs I was working with, I was like, you guys know I still work there, right? They're like, what are you doing? And then they started letting me out early on Fridays so I can go to work. And, it's kind of nice. So.
All right. Well, that's a lot to unpack. Let me just kind of quickly recap a lot of the insights here. I mean, you are an incredibly... I can just sit back. You're like the easiest person I've ever had to interview. And I've done, I think, like 100 interviews or something like that. Like I've never talked with somebody who could just so effortlessly like bring forth so many interesting insights in such rapid succession without any prompting at all from me. It's almost as if you're like a YouTuber who has like 250,000 subscribers and like all this, So, a couple observations. First, it sounds like you used your external pressure as kind of like a motivating force. Like you had extreme extrinsic pressure that like gave rise to intrinsic pressure to perform, to continue to expand your skills, to not let your team down, to get as good as they are. So what started off as just you maniacally like learning to code and thinking that getting the job was the end point, then you realize, oh no, I just went up to the next level. Right now, things are going to be even harder. And kudos to you for finding it within yourself to do that, because that sounds like a hellish 2 or 3 years of your life, like just constantly do it, and then working the crazy graveyard shift at the club on Friday night. That's wild. Like, yeah, my condolences to your family because you were probably not super present during that time. But seriously, like some observations. First, building your network, like going to those meetups, even though you felt like a total fish out of water, and putting yourself out there and not just shrinking. A lot of people, when they face that kind of like almost traumatic experience of like having to go on the stage and plug in their laptop and talk in front of a bunch of people that knew way more about them. I've been there. By the way, a lot of Dorian's, for those listening, a lot of Dorian's journey points kind of mirror similar things that I did when I learned to code. I left my day job of being a school director. Again, we come from very different backgrounds, but like the process was the same. You have to learn this stuff. Like everybody ultimately has to learn the skill. Everybody ultimately has to build their network and their reputation as a developer. And how you and I went about it, despite the fact that we did have like a little different like academic background, certainly, we went about basically the exact same way. So it's incredibly heartening to hear that like you leverage recruiters instead of, listening to the people that poo-poo recruiters. Like, first of all, I never understood the hate for recruiters. I think recruiters are a huge asset to you as you're looking for a job. And if you can find a recruiter that will advocate for you, don't give them any money. That's probably a scam. But if they're just taking, a finder's fee from the company that you ultimately get employed at, that is like very much a positive expected value for you. And so you leverage the recruiter, you met the people, and you earnestly followed up with them, and you actually made up like, oh, this person's offered me a job. Once I feel ready, or offered me an interview. Once I feel ready, I'm going to go and interview. And you didn't let those setbacks push you down. You just kept redoubling your effort to study. It's like incredibly motivating, and I can see why so many people have watched your videos over the years to fire themselves up about learning the code. So yeah, like everybody be sure, like I've got links to everything in the show notes. Check those out. But, let's talk about like the next few years of your life. Cause I want to be sure we touch on that. And we do want to, like, I do have another thing that I want to talk about. I'll go ahead and tease it. But your own struggles with addiction that I think a lot of people in the audience can probably relate to. We are going to talk about that in a little bit, but I want to go ahead and go through, just quickly go through the next few years, like, because at this point we're maybe like 2021,
2019, actually.
2019,
I got my first job at 2017 was my first job in July. And then I left there almost after 2 years in 2019. And then I guess we can go right into it.
Yeah, go for it.
So so then I did that job for about 2 years. There was with toxic work environments. It's funny because sometimes the management doesn't realize the stress that they're putting on certain developers, and I think everybody deals with their own stresses, and everybody's got, like, when you're dealing with a big corporation, you've like everyone. It's like that meme where it's like the birds on different sticks, and then there's like the bird at the top that poops on the birds under there, and then they poop under there, and then the people at the bottom get the most pooped on. And there's kind of a bit of that to it. So I don't want to I don't want to talk poorly about any of the management. I think that everybody was dealing with their own pressures, but I think that there was also a big mystery to what the developers did there, because we worked in a marketing department. We weren't part of IT because since we were responsible for the websites of the entire corporation, we used AEM as a content management system, and I was responsible for 50 plus websites for every casino that was under the Caesars Entertainment umbrella. So we had a lot of people that were a part of marketing that didn't know what we were doing, and they had good intentions. And what happened was that there was eventually an employee survey, and our department got the worst rating, and it was us. It was the devs. There was like 6 of us. They had just hired 2 new guys. They hired a senior guy and a junior guy, and I was the junior guy. And the senior guy ended up becoming like a really good friend of mine, and I ended up working with him again in the future, again, building your network at a different job. But he eventually became the lead after everybody started quitting, right? Like the guy that hired me, he stayed for about another year, got overworked, and then realized that he had so much experience that he could just double his salary and get half of the stress immediately. And they tried to like revamp, and like, we all, there was 8 of us in like one small office that was supposed to be for like one executive, but it was very much like the startup vibe in there, right? It was just like 8 sweaty developers in a small room, and we all, our laptops are on top of books, and we were like, we're sharing desk, and it was very fun, and it was a really good learning environment for us. But then after they got the bad reviews saying that there was a lot of us that were unhappy, they wanted to bring us out into the open, and they wanted to give us a new office, which was nice. But at the same time, I think there was a mix of like, we got to micromanage these guys more because we don't know what they're doing in that office. And I think that they felt like we weren't actually contributing, when the truth was that we were all overworked, ironically enough. But we just, like, people started getting sick of it, and eventually I got sick of it. They gave me an insultingly low raise, and then everybody will tell you the best way to get a raise is to find a new job. So I eventually started interviewing for other places, and I got an interview and an offer from Allegiant Airline. And it's funny because when it rains, it pours. I started applying, and it was like, I think I applied for almost 3 months and like heard nothing. And I was like, oh man, maybe I don't have enough experience yet, right? Like I was approaching the 2-year mark, which like people tell you like that's a sweet spot. Now I don't know, the job market's a little different. 2 years might not be the same, but at that point in time, if you had 2 years of experience, you were like junior to mid-level, and you were more marketable when it came to recruiters. And I've got a mixed feeling for recruiters, and I made a video like talking poorly about recruiters a while back, and I kind of made it private because I feel like I spoke out of personal, like just I hate my inbox getting emails and then texts and then phone calls, and then like they don't know what they're actually hiring for, but there are some very competent and good recruiters. So I took that video down. But nonetheless, like I started meeting with recruiters, and then I found the Allegiant job, and I interviewed for that. And it was funny because the first interview, I was just like, I interviewed with the team. There was a manager, a developer, and like another like human resources person there. And they started asking me questions and like my opinion on stuff. And they were using like weird tech. I can't remember at the time, but something was just like, they were like, oh, how would you do this? And I was like, well, I wouldn't do that. Like, that's not that's like, you shouldn't use that for that. It was something, God, I wish I could remember exactly what it was, but I might've sounded like arrogant, but I was just like basically like, hey, that's not like a really outdated way of doing things, and you shouldn't do that in a modern, like if you're building for like IE10 maybe, but you guys aren't supporting those older browsers. It was something along those lines where I was just like, that's a weird way of doing it. And I think the manager didn't like it, but he wasn't the technical guy. And then I felt like I bombed that interview, and then 2 weeks later, I actually got a call back from them because the person that they wanted to hire fell through. And they wanted me to go do a technical interview on site, and it was like for a UI developer job, so it wasn't like JavaScript, it was more like HTML. And they connected, I got there, they connected my laptop to a projector, and I had to like build an HTML page from scratch, which, like, if you haven't done that in a while and you've been working in a framework, it's kind of like, I just did a video on it, so I remember like the structure of it now, but I'm just kind of like, oh, that's weird. But for some reason, I had like just been like, I don't remember, but it just worked out where I was just like, I aced it. Like, I nailed it. They basically, on the spot, they were like, hey, we want to introduce you to like one of the higher ups that has the final call, because we want to like eliminate you having to come back. And then I met like a VP, shook his hand, and they're like, oh yeah. And then eventually I got a phone call, negotiated a salary. But at the same time, I had interviewed for Washington State, and that job would have been more UI with like email templates, and it paid well, and it was for Allegiant, and I probably could have eventually moved into a position that I would have been happier with as a developer. But at the time, I didn't want to do email templates because it felt like a step back for me, because I had already been doing kind of like full stack development, and I had already been doing TypeScript and like Java, and like understanding more of like real software development. I don't want to say that email templating is not, but it's really, it's kind of just HTML and CSS. And I was going beyond that. And then the Washington State job was like, it was a UI UX developer, but it was in Angular, it was in Spring Boot, it was in a more modern stack. And there was potential, like I asked during the interview process, like, hey, I don't want to just do HTML and CSS. I want to make sure that I'm going to have opportunities to grow. And they reassured me that there would be, and they did. And so I ended up having like 2 offers. Allegiant, like I did the drug test, I did all of this stuff to like get the job, and I was ready to start, and I had to call them and be like, sorry, I went with another job. So they weren't happy about that, and then eventually moved to Washington for that second job. And I did that job for almost 2 years, and I learned a lot on that job. But then that's when COVID happened. That's when I started my YouTube channel, and that's when I started, like, I went more full-time remote, and there was a lot of like, what are we doing? Like COVID, I think, made a lot of people start thinking a little bit outside of the box, and like the pandemic really like hit like my wife hard, because she's a very social extrovert type person who just can't be in the house and needs to do stuff. And then when we started really thinking about like what are we doing? Like like what's life going to be like? Like our kids are going to grow up too fast. And is this really what we want? Like, do we want to just kind of like do the same routine day in and day out? And, we eventually then sold our second home at that point, and like, hit the road for a little bit, and that eventually led to the travels. But in between that, I did some contracting work, and like my resume, looking back now, like there's some, there's a couple gaps in my resume, and there's a couple like job hopping, like 6 months, 3 months, and then like contract work. And like, I'm looking back and I'm like, I hope I didn't damage my resume. But like, when I look at those gaps, and I think like, well, that one gap was Europe, and now this new gap is Asia. So it's just like, at the end of my life, am I going to look back and be like, I wish I really didn't have those gaps in my resume? Or am I like, you know what? I'm glad that I tried to make YouTube a full-time thing and travel the world with my family, because like, that's a story. At least, if I'm broke and can't get a job, at least I'll be like, what I did back in my day.
Yeah. Wow. So, I mean, obviously the pandemic like adjusted a lot of people's perception of like how much they could actually get done remotely. I like to think that the pandemic put remote work ahead like a decade in terms of like all those experiments that like I remember, because freeCodeCamp is all remote. We never had an office, and I would often like people would be like, "Well, how do you get things done without an office?" And I mean that's a good question, because like a lot of managers will advocate for like, well, you can get so much more done if you just have everybody on top of each other in like some developer bullpen, and they're having to hear each other's phone conversations and smell each other's body odor and stuff like that. But at the time there was like a single big study on remote work from like C-Trip in China, and like it was basically that people were more productive, but they were less likely to get promoted because they weren't like in the manager's face all day. So like at the top of mind. So they were doing more work, but the perception was they were doing less work, even though they were actually getting more done because they weren't commuting and stuff like that. Anyway, like that was the big study. And I think I answered some questions on Quora about it and stuff like that, because I've always believed in remote work, and I've thought it's like a lot more sane than getting on the freeway and sucking tailpipe exhaust and risking destroying your car and spending a whole bunch of time like commuting and parking and dressing up, like all the different things that you have to worry about when you work in an office. And it sounds like you kind of figured out during this process, like, hey, I can work as a developer wherever, and I want to take my kids and explore the world. And I just want to like compliment you, first of all, on doing all that work to put yourself in a position to where you could do that. Because I imagine a lot of people listening to this dream of just grabbing their kids that are, how old are you? Mine are 7 and 9. Yours are just a couple years younger, right?
7 and 8. Yeah, they're
okay, wow.
pretty much.
So yeah, taking those kids and showing them the world, like that is huge for them. They're always going to be able to look back and say, yeah, my dad was so cool. He like did what he needed to do so we could go and explore the world. And like having photos of them, very young, going to like Angkor Wat and stuff like that, right? That is really cool. They're going to be like the coolest kids in school if they go back to school, like when they've got these like this worldly knowledge and stuff, and appreciation for other cultures, and they don't run the risk of being ugly Americans abroad, right? Because they've kind of like steeped themselves in like, okay, America is not the only way to do things, right? Like things like that. So you've given your family something invaluable, even though you've kind of sacrificed your resume to an extent with like gaps and things like that. And there are going to be times of, like one of the things about YouTube is if you get off the YouTube treadmill, then your engagement starts to crater, and YouTube, just like TikTok, I think it's like learning from TikTok in the sense that like, it doesn't matter how many, subscribers you have, that does give you a little bit of an edge, but like basically you put the video out there, and if people aren't watching it, it's not going to recommend it to anybody. It doesn't care who you are. Like if Mr. Beast put out a picture, like a video that was just him sitting there eating a sandwich or something like that, and it was like really boring, nothing happened, that wouldn't necessarily be a multi-million view, video, even though there are like, I don't know how many, like 100 million subscribers there, right? So because of this, you kind of like sacrifice not only your resume to an extent, but the momentum you had on YouTube and all this stuff, just to go out, right, and do things. And so I was looking through your YouTube last night, and and I'd been watching a lot, but YouTube hadn't been recommending your videos to me because like I'm of course subscribed. I've engaged on a lot of your videos, commented, liked, and like all that stuff that YouTube is supposed to recommend stuff based on your behavior. But like it hadn't been recommending me your videos when I opened it up. It was just a bunch of video essays on like, the fighting game community and like, just obscure like business history and stuff like that. Random stuff that I watch on YouTube. But I went and I was like, I wonder what Dorian's top video of all time is. And I just went and I sorted by popular. And okay, you're a programming channel, right?
Yeah.
A programming channel. And your top video of all time has 3 million views. And I click it and it's just you sitting there. There's no change. You barely even move. There's like nothing visually interesting about the video. But it's so resonant and so compelling because... And the title of the video is like, I quit smoking marijuana for like 6 months or something like that, which was like, first of all, I didn't even know that you smoke marijuana. You're like the most high functioning, like previously constantly stoned person I've ever talked to.
Yeah.
But maybe you could talk about that video and like what inspired you to, quit. And maybe you can talk a little bit about your addiction and then what inspired you to be so candid and tell everybody? Because I had no idea. And like you took a big reputational risk by, admitting like making yourself vulnerable in that way.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess it's the best answer that I can give. I had shared quite a few different things on my YouTube channel in the past, and some of them would get viewed, but I didn't really do it for views. Like I've made videos that are overly produced, B-roll, custom B-roll, paid people to edit, and like they don't get any views, right? Where I really want them to do well. And then I've made a lot of videos that are more for, I don't know, maybe myself. Like it's almost like a bit of a therapy session. And I think about like there's a lot of people that I've watched, a lot of podcasts that I've listened to that have helped me in my journey, and like having other people that I felt like I could relate to share their stories has helped me a lot in my process of like trying to like get sober. And yeah, like, man, I've been drinking and smoking weed for as long as I can remember. Like I started very young as a teenager, early teens, and then like weed and alcohol are just something that has followed me throughout my whole life. And in my early 20s, I drank a lot. I smoked a lot. And it's just something that has always been there. And there have been times when I have stopped, but I've never like really tried to quit except for a handful of times. And I was also unsuccessful in those times. And then when I made that video, I had hit like the 6-month mark. It had been a fairly hard struggle, right? Like I said, I never really stopped before. And the time before that, while there was a bit of a, like, I wanted to quit, I didn't really want to. I felt like I had to. And of course there's some of that too. And I think with like anybody who's like dealing with any kind of like addiction, like it's very rare that somebody just stops cold turkey and then is just like, oh, my life is perfect now. It's a struggle, and addiction is something that I feel that maybe not enough of us talk about. And I just said, you know what, I'm gonna make this video. I have talked about those things in the past, and there have been times when I made the videos private and tried to hide them because I was like either looking for a job or felt like, oh, I don't want this to get out there. And I was just like, whatever, I'm just putting this one out in the wild. I don't care. And it kind of, got a few views at first, and then, gosh, if I went into the analytics, I could probably tell you like a month or two later, I'm like, man, this video is getting a lot of views. And then like all of a sudden I'm like, man, this video is getting the most views I've ever got on a video. And then at one point in time, I was sharing it on Twitter, and I was just like, this video has gotten 200,000 views in a 48-hour period. I've never gotten that many views in a 48-hour period. And I had videos at the time that were already over 1 million views. And it was just like, what the hell is going on? I'm like, oh, great. This is what everybody's like I sort channels by popular often because I kind of like try to like see, like I love being a YouTuber. I love going and seeing like, what is this person talking about now? And what did they start talking about? And like, what's their most viewed video? And like, it's interesting because a lot of people, even in the coding world, like you'll see some people will have like a one-off video where they're not talking about like their main topic, and that ends up being their most popular video. And now I've had a lot of back and forth with my YouTube and what I want from it. And after like doing one-on-ones and kind of seeing that, like, I felt it was a bit selfish of me to change my content, because my early videos, I mean, I probably did over 100 videos about learning how to code, struggles as a programmer, and different topics that would help developers. And I built quite a big audience around that. And then at one point, what happened was a personal thing. Like I kind of became burnt out. I didn't really like it as a job. I started making videos that were not fair to my audience. Some of them were me lashing out against programming because I was just kind of burnt out. And others were just like me kind of talking about random things that maybe some people wouldn't be interested in. Like I got into an ice bath phase. So I'm like, I'm going to make videos about ice baths. And then I've got a lot of random stuff on there now that it's just recently, it's so funny that we're doing this interview. I just recently, I'm going to reel it back in, and I'm going to kind of focus on the audience that I was trying to serve originally. And even though there are some personal things, because like one of my old videos that I remember you commenting on it was where I'm just like, it's like motivation for somebody who wants to learn how to code. And I'm like, hey, like, look, I'm a juvenile delinquent, ex-addict, single mother, first language was Spanish, and like I grew up like this, and I was still able to do it. And like that video actually got a lot of views, but I have to remember that was who I was trying to really like appeal to and like talk to, because I remember even in this video where we're talking now, how like I felt like I didn't belong in this industry. I still don't feel like I do. And like somewhere along the lines, I kind of got lost in like my ultimate like purpose for YouTube. And I made selfish content where you'll hear a lot of people tell you not to do that. But the irony is that some of that content is my best performing content.
Yeah.
But I have now decided that I gotta split the two. So I've created like a second channel where I'm gonna be talking more about that personal stuff, so that like I don't want to stop talking about that stuff, but I also feel that like not every single person that needs to learn about code is like coming from like a tough background and dealing with addiction, and like it's good to separate the two,
though,
I think.
Sorry to interrupt you. To be fair though, like a lot of those people, like you can give advice that I can't give. Like I grew up middle class. Like my dad went to university. My granddad went to university, right? So I'm like a third generation like college graduate, right? And most people in tech probably are, or they have some relative privilege. They like grew up in, at least a place where they weren't stealing cars and things like that, right? So because of that, and that is not representative of America in general. Only about 35% of Americans get a university degree. But like if you were to, look at like learn to code stuff, and if you were to look at like YouTube influencers and stuff, like you could just take as a foregone conclusion, most of them have a university degree or, some other thing that helped like vault them to being hireable. And you do not. And I feel like that's like kind of your superpower, is that you've succeeded in spite of all of this additional layers of challenge, things that you had to overcome. And so like, I would encourage you to like, first of all, you published like a comprehensive, video tutorial, like, just a few weeks ago, I think, that is like 45 minutes of like building a project and stuff like that. Yeah. And that's amazing. Keep doing that. But my humble advice is don't lose sight of the fact that one of the reasons people love you is because you are kind of like an everyman. Like you're much more representative of the typical American than I am. And I think that that's like a huge asset that you have in terms of being able to affect change and inspire people and educate people. Right. Yeah.
No. And I appreciate you saying that, because I think sometimes I need to hear that, because I think it goes back to insecurities and imposter syndrome, where I don't feel that way. Again, I'm still surprised that I've even been able to do what I've been able to do. And like looking back at like where I'm at and like how I started, I don't know. I guess I have a hard time giving myself credit where credit's due. And then I feel that I don't want to become that guy that's like humble bragging all the time, right? And I feel that sometimes some of my videos come across as that. And and then I struggle too because I've gotten to the point where I'm kind of a creator that sometimes I will release content on emotion rather than like thinking through, because I'll say this, like there's a large portion of YouTubers now, because YouTuber is like a big marketing platform for a lot of people to like build a brand and sell their products. And like, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but I feel like there's something missing where people are just more honest. And I end up making honest, emotional content sometimes that, you know, sometimes it's not good to speak out of emotion. Like I did a video and I didn't think about like how it would have impacted people, but it was probably a year ago now. And it was just like, the title was kind of clickbaity. And I was just like, everything about learning how to code is just effed. Right. And the video did very well. And I felt like I did a disservice to the people because I was kind of ranting about like the economy sucks. The you know, the learn to code sphere is a mess. Everybody's trying to make a buck. Nobody's really being honest anymore about like teaching you and how hard it is to get a job. And like I just went on this 20-minute rant and told, you know, kind of spoke like, yes, while you may go on Reddit and see that there's 100 posts that get pushed to the top about how bad tech jobs are, there's also a lot of posts that don't make it to the top because bad news sells, where people are still getting jobs and people are still hiring, and like AI isn't as big and scary as like all of these clickbait videos are making it seem. But when you're new and coming to the scene, you don't know that, so you take the word of the most viewed video, and then when you see someone who's just kind of ranting about how bad things are at the end of that video, which the thing is, most people don't make it to the end of your video, I say, like, even though it's the worst time to learn to code, I think it's one of the best times to learn how to code. There are so many resources. There is like tools like AI that can help us learn faster, and there's still a lot of opportunity out there. But I remember talking with someone who set up one of the calls with me, and they were like, hey man, like I saw that video and I was kind of like bummed out, and I was just like, oh, this is why when you get a larger following, you got to be careful with the stuff that you put out there. Because to me, I'm just the dude in the wooden box right now making a video, and I'm not really thinking about all the people that it could potentially impact. And I realize now that like some of my most impactful videos are the ones where I'm just talking, but when I put out I don't want to say the wrong information or emotional information that may not be 100% fact, it could potentially lead people into making decisions based off of my opinion, which I always try to tell people, like, have your own opinion. But the reality of it is there is a lot of influence in things like social media, and people do take what you say to heart. And then like, I just don't want somebody to screw up their opportunity because I had a bad day and made a video because I was just kind of, you know,
and
I needed to make a video and I got upset.
YouTube like definitely incentivizes doom and gloom. You know, just like the airport bestseller, you know, books encourage toxic positivity and, you know, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, everything will be fine, you're not working hard enough. Which, you know, there's some truth to that, and there's also some truth to the doom and gloom, right? But the truth almost always lies somewhere in the middle, right? Not in the extremes. And yet the extremes, extreme toxic positivity or extreme doom and gloom, those are what sell. Those are what get people to click through and watch and keep watching and keep reassuring themselves, I'm screwed whether I commit my life to learning the code or not. It's not really going to make a big difference. So I'm fine just where I am, you know, doing whatever it is. Like I worked at Taco Bell, like just working at Taco Bell. Like I can imagine if I were learning the code today, working at Taco Bell or working as a grocery store, you know, facing shelves and stocking shelves and being the first person there to mop the floor every morning, you know, like I would watch that video and like, well, gee, what's the point in like learning the code and putting all this time and energy if I'm not going to be able to get a good developer job, or if the whole thing's going to be automated? It can become kind of like this copium type thing, right? Where people are like, well, yeah, I guess it's all just a big scam anyway, so I'm glad I didn't bother investing my time and energy into that. And then they would lose all the opportunity to go out and get a developer job. And, you know, spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't like heard the FreeCodeCamp podcast before, or, you know, my interviews with like many super duper senior, you know, founder, engineer, CTO types and stuff that are way better at software development than I am. They don't believe that coding is over and that AI is going to solve everything, right? They believe that decades from now, we'll still have software engineers and they'll still need to learn data structures and scripting languages and you know, how to use databases, all those things that you were learning both on your own as you self-taught and on the job when you were working with Kotlin or when you're working with, Java, Spring Boot, and like all these other tools you were getting the opportunity to work with. So I certainly don't fault you for creating the doom and gloom that YouTube inspires, that it basically economically incentivizes. And I'll say something about YouTube. You can actually make money on YouTube, right? It's not like Twitter. I don't know. Maybe you can make money on Twitter. Like Elon Musk pretends that you can make money, but like FreeCodeCamp, I think we get like barely enough to cover like our blue verified check mark. We did it just because it like ostensibly increases the distribution within Twitter. Like they open sourced the algorithm ostensibly, and it says like you get twice as much, impressions if you pay the $8 a month or whatever. Right. So we're like, okay, fine, we'll pay $8 because it's important for us to reach as many people and tell them about these free courses we're making. But you can't make money on Twitter, I don't think. You definitely can't make money on like, TikTok or these other channels. Like the only places that I know of that you can make money, of course, would be like, creating courses and selling them, or creating, content and like creating albums and selling it on Bandcamp, or, something like that, writing books and selling them on Gumroad or something like that. Or YouTube. YouTube actually has an extremely effective, very well laid out, very transparent platform through which you can make money. And I know lots of people who supplement their income by creating courses. And there are even some people who are able to work full time just creating videos for YouTube, right? And you get to keep 55% of the advertising revenue, and then YouTube keeps 45%. So they're still collecting a lot of fee for basically platforming you and being your source of distribution, but it's totally viable. So sorry for that long aside, but I just want to emphasize like YouTube kind of pushed you in that direction of like diversifying your content. And like, if you see a lot of people, they start off doing like programming tutorials, and next thing you know, they're doing like, very broad, like assessments. They very quickly get out of their depth and start creating videos that they don't know what they're talking about. Right. One of the reasons like this podcast is so long and it's totally unedited is because I like increasing the amount of honesty in the world and candor in the world. And like we don't use like clickbaity kind of things on FreeCodeCamp because we don't want to go down that road. We want people who are genuinely interested to watch the videos and learn, or to watch the podcast and hear the insights. So, I definitely admire you trying to get back to where you were originally, creating a second channel for the things. But here's the thing I want to underscore. That video about how you quit smoking marijuana, which, I know so many people. When I grew up, of course, like everybody at school smoked marijuana. Like I'm not going to lie and say I haven't smoked marijuana before, right? Like I think most American kids in like the 80s, 90s, maybe even the 2010s, although I would already grown up by then, would do it. And the narrative around it is, oh, it's not addictive. Oh, it's just like, alcohol. It's better than alcohol because, it doesn't damage your liver. Or like I heard so many kind of like things, people saying like marijuana wasn't a big deal and things like that. And then to watch that video that 3 million other people have watched, where you talk about how you were essentially constantly in some, on some spectrum of like just smoke marijuana to like kind of like coming down off marijuana. And then you would just throughout the day, like vape to get back up constantly every single waking day of your life, that it was the first thing you did in the morning, that you would do it to help you go to sleep, that you're constantly in the state of being affected by this psychoactive chemical. I mean, it was just incredibly refreshing to see you do that. And I'm very grateful that you published that video on your main channel to maximize the number of people who saw it. Because when I read through the comments, all I saw were people like, I've been sober for 6 months, best decision I ever made. Or, I'm, how many people are high right now thinking about quitting, and like all these different things in the comment section. And I was just like, wow, like you really touched a nerve and like opened up a discourse. Because if somebody who like the highest functioning marijuana addict I've ever met can basically work as a software engineer, can, take his family abroad and do all these things and be a high functioning addict. Like, I think that just shows like the degree to which people can kind of warp their being around a chemical or a substance. And, like it takes great courage to just like get rid of it now, I think. But you talk a lot about it in the video, and I'm going to link the video to, even though it's not related to learning the code, and check out all Dorian's videos about learning the code. But I just want to emphasize that this is, a profound video. And if you have a moment to maybe talk about what, like what your journey has been like, what your year of being sober has been like following that. Because I suspect that the FreeCodeCamp podcast has a big enough audience that maybe some people in the audience are on a substance right now, or they're struggling to try to quit. And maybe you can make a case for like how much better your life has become now that you've managed to like break the chains.
Yeah. I'll be honest. It's still weird to be like, I'm sober, right? Like because I went so long where it was just like, yeah, if it wasn't weed, I was drinking. If I wasn't drinking, it was weed, or if it was both for a very long time. And then like, the harder stuff when I was younger, that I'm glad that I kind of had my experience with. I guess I'm not glad that I had it, but I'm glad that I didn't get stuck with that into my adult life, or too far into my adult life. But then the things that stayed, like, you mentioned, like a lot of people, there's the stigma around weed is not what it maybe was, 50 years ago, where it's just very normalized. It's very available in a lot of places. If it's not completely recreational, there's medicinal resources to get it. And I think that it's become more accepted in our society, especially in like the US. I think it's, like you said, like growing up, everybody I knew, like pretty much everybody has smoked at some point, or tried it, or known someone that has. But what ends up happening, or what happened to me, was that like I carried that into my adult life, and I was probably using it to cope with, childhood trauma. And then also I was just exposed to substances at a very, very, very young age, that like it just became a part of who I was. And then like culturally, and like the people that I grew up with, like it was always just like everybody smoked weed, and that kind of stayed true into my adult life. But then I found myself being like, a father and a husband, and then like also like a stoner, or a weed addict, essentially, right? And I'd still drink, and there was like I would drink a few times a week, right? And I got that under control, even though that was like really out of control when I was younger. But then it was just like the weed was just like every moment of the day. Like I had to be exactly at a certain level. If not, I'd start getting cranky or start craving it. And like I was just walking around with that cart. I referred it to it as a vape in the video. And I don't know if people were getting confused, that they thought I was talking about a nicotine vape, but no, it was like a cartridge. And it was just, and the only reason I did that was because it was discreet, so my kids wouldn't smell it, because they started getting older, and like they started becoming aware. And like I remember I would leave my vape carts or on like my table sometimes, and my kids would walk in the room, and I'd be hiding it because they'd be asking like, "Hey, what is that?" Like I always see you with that. And I just started feeling like that like I don't want to be the stoner dad. I don't want to be the guy that has a closet problem of like addiction. And there was a lot of other process going on. Like I had gone to therapy a few times, and I had been trying to work out some of these things, and like really trying to be analytical of like what has led me to this point to being like this. And, like I said, it's a combination of just habit and it being in my life for so long, and then also using it as a coping mechanism and self-medicating. And then like I was always one of those people that was like, herb is medicine, and like and while there may be some medicinal properties to it, and there are people that do benefit from it, I was 100% an addict. Like there's no doubt about it. Like it was like my eyes opened. I like on the way to the bathroom to like start my day, it was like I would hit my cartridge, and it was just in my hand all day long. And I think I saw it for what it was, and started saying like I had gone many times where I tried to like quit drinking, and there was a few times when I tried to quit smoking, and then I think I just said, all right, enough's enough. I realized how much it was impacting my mood. I saw like it was affecting my relationships. I started feeling like I was always distant and never in the moment. And just like I was always in this fog because I just didn't feel clear. And then I started like questioning, like, like what has this done to me, from a developmental standpoint, since I had started at such a young age. If you start doing research, you start seeing that there's a lot of problems that happen from when your brain is developing and people who use marijuana from adolescence into adulthood. And like, I was just like, am I limiting my potential? Am I causing like more problems for myself by doing this? And I also I started feeling very anxious and I started feeling depressed. And I was just like, I need to eliminate these other things in order for me to see like what's the root cause. Like start by a process of elimination, I start getting rid of other things that I feel might be causing me to feel a certain way or be a certain way. And I can only know if in fact it's something that is within me or if it's something that I am putting in my body that is making me feel this way. And then like the first few months was really hard. And by the time I made that video, I feel like I was just starting to come out of it. Funny enough, it was like 6 months later. And I felt that, full disclaimer, because I got a little bit of crap in some of the other videos where like in that first 6 months, the first 3 months, there was a few times where I did like, I tried to do like psychedelic therapy and like I did things to try to like I was trying to figure it out, and I heard like Tim Ferriss talk about it, and I heard like Huberman did a podcast on like psilocybin, and I was just like, maybe that could help me. And I did it a couple times. So then I'll get like comments like, oh, well, you weren't really sober, or on my update videos where I'm like, I've been so, but here's the thing, right? Like since then, like I have not touched alcohol, I've not touched weed, and I haven't done psychedelics since, almost a year ago now. So it's just like, I am sober, and maybe that did help me get here. I also did ice baths daily. I've been doing them now that we're back for this time. And that was helpful too. I was just trying to figure out how I can like get a grip on myself again. And I finally, like at that 6 month mark of that video, what I was saying was that like that felt like when I was finally starting to come out of the haze. And I just wanted to kind of share how I felt about it, because I felt personally that I'd been lied to a bit of the, oh, it's medicine, it's therapeutical, it's all this stuff. And like I said, yeah, there are some properties to that. But when you become addicted and you're using it every single day, just with any other pharmaceuticals that could be, used for pain relief and stuff like that. Like, yeah, like when I came out of surgery, I remember telling the doctor, like, give me just enough for what I need, because I have, and this was before I quit smoking weed, but I knew how I am. I was like, don't give me any more than I need, because I know that I'll start using that recreationally. So it was just like, I went through more pain recovering from my knee surgery than I needed to, because I tried to use ibuprofen instead of the, I don't even remember what it was that they prescribed to me, but it was, the hard stuff. And I think it was more painful for me because I was just scared. Like, I was like, no, I can't do that. And, this is all like years of me realizing this stuff has led to me finally deciding to get sober. And I guess just being able to be real enough with myself about that stuff. And and now looking back, feeling like, man, great. I can't believe I'm where I'm at, but I realize how easy I can slip up. So I have gotten to the point where I'm like, I don't drink, I don't smoke, and that is it. Because if I allow myself to do it once, I've done it too many times, and a year is not a lot of time when I compare it to like the last 25 years of my life where I have been on that cycle of addiction and drug use, and even video game addiction. Like, I was hugely addicted to video games, and when I was younger too. So
again, I'm just glad you never got addicted to gambling, because that would
even
when you stop gambling, you still have the shadow of that.
I hated losing money. It was just, I did not like the feeling of losing money. I think maybe because I grew up not having a lot of money, that it just felt like I don't know, it sounds terrible, but at least with like substances, you have something to show for it. Even with gambling, you just don't. You just have that in the moment dopamine hit that you're getting, when the machine lights up, and then you walk out of there just feeling like crap. So I'm glad I didn't get addicted to that too, because that would have really sucked.
Well, thank you so much for sharing kind of your thoughts on that. Like, congratulations on being 1 year sober.
Thank you.
I often tell people, like in the audience, like, I think alcohol is also extremely corrosive to your mental health, to your social health. I mean, it causes people to do dumb things that they're going to regret. Obviously, getting in a car and driving, but also just saying dumb things or getting themselves into like injured for other silly reasons, potentially injuring family members. When my daughter was born 9 years ago, I basically said, I'm never going to drink again. And I haven't drank in 9 years, not even a single sip of alcohol. I'm really proud alongside you that you've managed to also abstain from alcohol. There's, like lots of studies put out by the alcohol industry, and I'm sure there will be lots of studies put out by big marijuana. Now that marijuana is legal in a lot of parts of the United States, and I'm not going to comment on, the politics of any of that, but I will say that a lot of that research is nonsense. And I don't believe alcohol is better for you in any way. And I think most of the research that you will still probably see quoted and stuff has been widely refuted about alcohol somehow being good for you.
Yeah.
So, congratulations for getting off that. The one psychoactive drug that you and I still drinking my tea right now, is caffeine. And, the verdict is still out on that, but maybe that's just what big caffeine wants you to think. Yeah. But I'm not planning on, I have gone for like a year and a half, 2 years without drinking caffeine. And I went back on caffeine and I was more productive. So that is the one psychoactive substance that I will not bash. But anyway, like I'm not a total, abolitionist, or what is the term? Is that like for somebody who wants to completely make things illegal? I don't think making things illegal is necessarily the answer. But anyway, this is not a political discussion. We will not talk about that. What I will say is I'm thrilled for you that can you talk about like the difference in your ability to get things done as a developer and as like a parent and all these other dimensions? Like, do you feel like you've unlocked a new 50% of your capabilities or something like that?
So to an extent, yes. I realize how much. So it's funny, right? Because I've had a lot of people comment and say like, do you have ADHD? Have you been diagnosed? Like you the way you sounds like someone who has ADHD. I've also had therapists ask me if I wanted to be assessed. I also did like online assessments that like some of the official ones. One of them was like a 300 question questionnaire, and it all points to like I might be on that spectrum, and I would say I probably am, just seeing how like I can just really get completely obsessed with one thing and like consume my entire life around that, where everything else kind of goes to shambles. And for so many years, I've focused it on bad things or things that weren't great, like my video game addiction. Like that was really bad. And I don't know whether or not I have ADHD, but I feel like I have some of those traits. And when I was constantly like, smoking all the time, I felt like it did feel like I would question myself on like, why is it taking me this long to learn something? Or like, why is it taking me this long to like just process this thought? And I mean, that's kind of what weed does. It kind of like I shout out to Andrew Huberman. His podcast really helped me out a lot, because I know there's people that have different mixed feelings about him, but listening to his episode on cannabis and like the effects on the brain, and he talked about how I think it was in that episode where like the creativity and how like the mind on weed basically gives you like a whole bunch of different thoughts, but it doesn't let you be able to like focus on one thought. And I think that like I felt like that a lot, and then after not like smoking for a while, I realized that I really was impacting the way that I can clearly focus on things. And even though I still struggle with focus sometimes now, I don't know if that is a product of like, still we have a lot of distractions, or maybe it's just because like my whole life I've been smoking weed, and maybe it impacted my development of my brain like that. Yeah. Or maybe I do have ADHD, but I still can tell a noticeable difference between now and how I was a year ago, where it was just very hard for me to focus on like anything. And even if I was working on something, it was just like my mind would wander and I would just like be in a haze from just kind of being under the influence of cannabis. So it's just like, yes, now I feel like I can focus better, but I still feel like I have struggles with that stuff. And I'm not officially diagnosed, but I try my best. Like I have like little notebooks, and I have like, my notes app, and I'm actually going back to using Apple Notes versus Notion, but I used to try to use Notion, and I try to like set myself reminders, and I try to do deep work, right? And I try to like focus and stay off of like social media, but then it's just like, we're in a very busy world. I don't know if it was before the interview or like where we were talking before we started recording, but you were kind of talking about how you don't answer emails until, like only a couple times a week,
Yeah.
and you don't like the distractions. And I'm trying to start doing more of that, and I'm trying to limit distractions, and I'm trying to be able to focus more on deep work and like get away from having so much going on in order to better focus my attention on things. But to answer your question, yeah, I can see a noticeable difference from when, like this is your brain on drugs versus like this is like sober. And it does feel
pan.
a lot better. Yeah, the egg on the frying pan. And again, there's a millennial Gen X reference that not many of the younger people watching might get that reference. But yeah, that's exactly what it kind of feels like. And it is crazy, man, because like when I was learning how to code, I remember I had, like I said, it was about 10 months. And when I was doing all the networking stuff, like even like reading, like studying for the exams for like the CompTIA A+, I was smoking pretty much regularly. And I didn't stop smoking until I was like thinking I was getting job ready. And I was just like, if I get drug tested, I don't want to fail a drug test for a potential job. And I had stopped, and I, just as just something to talk about in that sense, the minute I got the job at Caesars, like that day, I went and I like got some weed and I smoked, and I remember having like just like this breakdown of like, what am I doing? I just went like 4 months without doing this. The minute I get a job, and I'm freaking out, I'm like, what if they do a random? What if, all this stuff? And there's been so many moments like that in my life where it's just like going back to the addiction. Like I did that the same thing for the Washington State job. I kind of stopped smoking for a little bit beforehand because I was worried I was going to get drug tested. And then when I got the job, we moved to Washington. I waited to like officially start. And like the end of that first week on the job, when I was like, all right, I'm safe, went right back to it. When we went to Europe, we didn't have weed in Europe. And the minute we came back, and I remember my wife just being so disappointed in me. I mean, we were at the airport, we picked up the car, and I immediately stopped at a dispensary on the way to her parents' house. And that's just how like addicted I was to that like, yeah, I could go a whole 6 months in Europe without it, but I was drinking every single day and feeling like that was normalized because I was trying to like make up for not having the weed. I don't want to like go too far into like talking about addiction, but
I mean, this is really good. This is because, again, like you had the wherewithal and the discipline to like cut it out of your life when there was some extrinsic reason, like I could get drug tested, this could cost me my job, but when left to your own devices, you just went right back to old habits. Like the moment you could, you reverted. And yeah, I mean, that does show like that, even as an addict, you had the conscientiousness to know when you couldn't get away with it.
Yeah. My biggest regret was, like you said, that you stopped drinking like as soon as your kids were born. I wish I would have done it as soon as my kids were born. I am sad and disappointed with myself that I allowed such a long amount of their childhood for me to be under the influence of substances, and how that made me like just not be as present as I could have been, or maybe put me in a bad mood when I shouldn't have been, and I just wish, like, if I could go back and do one thing different, like I wish I would have just stopped sooner, and I wish I would have stopped for them right away. And they are a big reason why I stopped. But like you said, like I think an addict is never ready to stop until they're ready. I just wish I would have been ready a little bit sooner for the sake of my kids not having to like, deal with the stuff that they probably had to deal with that like could have been avoided had I just stopped a little bit sooner. But it's another reason why I refuse to let myself go back to my old ways. And I get it now when addicts are like, no, I can't just have one sip. I wish I could. And I have no problem with people drinking. Like if my wife wants to have a couple drinks, like she's extremely supportive. And for a while she didn't drink, and like she used to be like someone who would like smoke weed occasionally. But like she didn't drink for the sake of me trying to stop. But even like recently, like she went out with some friends, I was like, that's fine. You're able to have a drink. Like I don't look at people who are able to smoke a little bit on the weekend or able to have like a few beers while they're watching the game. That's fine. I can't. Some people will be like, oh, that's weak-minded, or like you don't have enough willpower. I was like, if you only knew how much willpower I actually do have to be able to say that I can't.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great way of thinking about it. Like, just, yeah. So I really appreciate you sharing that so candidly. And this is like one of the prouder moments in the history of the Free Code Camp podcast that we have a guest who talks so openly about this weakness. Essentially, like you are weak for this substance that you've been exposed to, and you've been doing it for so many years, but it's a victory of kind of the cerebrum over the cerebellum, or whatever part of the body controls. It's like you are smart enough and you have the force of will to set aside this thing that you would love to just keep vegging out and doing, right, for the rest of your life. So again, I'm like super duper proud alongside you with everything you're accomplishing, and here's to many, many more years of sobriety, so you can really be there for your kids, and so you can continue to do what is necessary to achieve your dreams and provide for your family. On that note, if you're cool, I've got a lot more questions I want to fire, like kind of rapid fire. For everybody who's still listening, like I hope this has been like a really exciting like journey into Dorian's life. And we're going to learn a lot more from him, because there is an incredible amount that we stand to learn from this guy. So one of the things, a lot of it's going to be around like personal finance and kind of like how you've managed to put yourself in a position where you can travel abroad and do all these things. And yeah, I think it's like super cool and super inspiring, and it'll be super useful for the audience. So one of the things that you talked about just very briefly in one of your episodes, you used this term, and it jumped out at me, and I was like, wow, I need to ask him about this. What is lifestyle creep?
Oh man. So lifestyle creep happens. It happens, I think the person I heard the best describe lifestyle creep was Naval Ravikant, or at least how to not be affected by lifestyle creep. And it's usually like when you have like if you go from like making $30,000 a year to $100,000 a year overnight, like it's probably going to be easier for you to still live like you make $30,000 a year, right? But it's when you start going from like 50 to 70 to 90, and then you basically, it's almost a Parkinson's law of finance, right? Where it's like Parkinson's law is where if you're given a certain amount of time to complete a task, you'll always find a way to fill that task with that exact amount of time. Like it'll always take you just as long as you have to get it done. And I think that with finances and lifestyle creep, it's like if given a certain amount of budget, you will always find a way to spend money to get to that allotted budget, right? And I started noticing that where you don't intentionally do it. And I think that like my wife and I were really frugal when we bought our first home. Like you might listen here and be younger and be like, oh, you were lucky you got to buy a house and you were a waiter and your wife was a blackjack dealer. But like the truth is, like, man, we saved so much money. Like we saved every penny that we could. I went from like having a terrible credit score to like slowly building it up. And then in that year when we were really like, let's try to save up and see if we can get a down payment on a house and do the right thing. And we saved up to the point where like I was able to get my credit back. We paid off all of our debt. And then we had just enough to get an FHA loan, which is, I think it was like 7% at the time. And we also got like a fairly affordable house. We bought like a foreclosure. So there are things that kind of like, you didn't, $180,000 loan back then was more than what $180,000 is now. But I think that with the money that we were making, we were still like lower middle class at the time. And then we were really like kind of cheap. Like we didn't spend a lot of money. And then slowly, once we sold our house and we made some money from our home and we had some extra money and I started making more money little by little, you start finding ways to spend that money. And then on top of that, you had inflation and all of these things recently where now like the lifestyle has creeped up on you. And when we came back from Europe, we were just like, hey, like we want to live in a nice neighborhood. All right, well, that's almost $3,000 in rent for a house in that neighborhood. Hey, we need a nicer minivan. Well, mind you, I'm not talking about driving a Tesla or like a really nice car, but like a $35,000 minivan that's financed on top of like, whatever 14 or 15% interest and making $600 payments on that, plus your rent, plus this, plus that. Next thing you know, it's just like you're making $120,000 a year, but you're spending every dollar of it. And now any extra money you make, you find a way to spend it. And it's really easy for you to let that lifestyle start creeping up on you because you make more money. You think you can spend more money and you don't realize how it just happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I have discussions with my wife all the time. Like we're getting swimming lessons for the kids. I'm like, that's $35 for 30 minutes of swimming lesson. Like I remember when I used to work at the grocery store and $35 was like what I'd make after a shift, basically. And like the notion that we're giving that to somebody who's, lifeguarding it and is teaching our kids, so swimming, I'm like, do we really need to do this? So we have like all this tension and discussion. And that brings me to the question about your wife. Like a lot of people who are listening to this are married or who are in long-term relationships. And at one point you had to convince your wife that it was okay for you to quit your lucrative job or scale back your lucrative job, parking cars and doing the jobs you were doing so that you could focus on learning to code. And, there's this saying like behind every great man, there's a woman. And it's probably more like accurately modernized to say, but behind every great person, there's a partner. Can you tell me a little bit about that dynamic between you and your wife and how you were able to negotiate that so that she would continue doing her job, but you could focus on building your long-term skills?
Yeah, man. I think the best thing that someone can have for them is someone that believes in them. And I can't say I've had that my whole life. Like, many people who are raised in a good household might have that. And it's just something that I wasn't used to. And then I met my wife who she's too good for me. Like I don't know how I got so lucky to get such a good partner. And during the time when I was learning how to code, I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier where I was just like, I talked with her and I was just like, just give me some time to do this. And like, I'll make it worth your while. Like, hopefully like one day I can work and you can stay at home if you choose to, and you can like focus on raising the kids and like that aspect. And like, let me do this now so that we can both like benefit from the fruits of our labor or the labor I was putting in. And I also think that like she saw that I was working hard. Like never once, like when I said that I was learning how to code and I gave up everything, like never once did she come out and she saw me playing video games. Like it was like she'd come out and I'm watching, I don't know, some YouTube tutorial on the TV, and I got my laptop on my lap, and it was just constant. And there was a lot of stressful moments too, and I had my own doubts, but she always kind of like, I believe in you. And I think just having someone who's able to say, I believe in you it's a life changer. I think it's really important to have that for children as well. And I try to encourage my kids into like doing anything that they can, because I do think that to a certain extent, like people could really accomplish anything they put their minds to with enough time and enough effort. I think that it is possible. Just many of us stop believing in ourselves or don't have anyone that will be there to help us along the way. And I remember, she went on her medical leave for having the baby, and then like she had to go back to work, and there was that time before I got the job, and she was like back at work, and she's like breastfeeding, and she's working graveyard shifts, so she's away from the baby at night, and it was just like really hard for us to like balance things out. And she had to work days that I wasn't working, and then eventually it was just like, hey, like let's get you away from your job. We'll take on a little debt if we have to, but like that'll give me more time to focus on this, and then like it'll get you from having to like be at work, and I'll try to like pick up an extra shift if I need to, and like we'll figure it out. And like we started taking on debt, and it was definitely a team effort. Like, yeah, I learned how to code on my own, but I think like nobody's truly self-taught, right? Like if it wasn't for YouTube and Google and like the people that I met at meetups and like all of the different resources and like things that I used to learn how to code, like, yeah, I'm the one that sat there and spent the time to do it, but there was a lot of things that taught me and helped me to learn. And I think that my wife allowing me to take all of that time to do the stuff that I did is one of the main reasons why I was able to be successful in accomplishing it and being able to finally get a job. And it was also a big reason why like I kept one night at the club, because we did get into debt, and we had to like try to pay that stuff off. And by selling our first home, we were able to get out of our debt completely. And we're still kind of riding that a little bit, and we have savings, and I feel like I try to be as responsible as possible, especially with like traveling and stuff and the money that comes in from YouTube. Like I don't want to dip into our life savings in order for us to live my dream. But at the same time, like this is part of my wife's dream, and like she's very much involved in a lot of the decisions we make. And I always say I have to be careful, because whenever I say I want to do something, like if I'm like, hey, we should really, go to Asia, next thing I know, she's buying the tickets, because she's like, I'm the dreamer, but she's got a lot of the follow through in a lot of things, especially when it comes to planning and being organized. Like I'm really not very good at that stuff, right? And maybe it goes to like what we were talking about earlier with like being a little scatterbrained, or maybe it is ADHD, but she's the one that like books all the flights, she books all the accommodations, she kind of plans out the itinerary, she figures out where we're going to go. And like she's always been like that. Even like when I was learning how to code, she would like try to figure out like how we can organize our day so that I would have more time to learn. And just like having that support, like it definitely is like an advantage that I don't want to say an advantage or took advantage of that, but I'm saying like if I didn't have that, would I have been able to do it? Yes. But during those moments of doubt and those times that I felt like I wasn't going to be able to do this thing, and then to have someone by my side to be like, no, like you got this, like just that made all the difference. And I say this joke often because it's not a joke. It's 100% true. When I first started my YouTube channel, I would record the videos in the evening, like once the kids were asleep, in the back room that we had. That was like a second living room. And then I eventually made an office out of this little like addition thing that stretched out. That was kind of like a shed shop thing in that house that we bought. But I would stand there in that living room, and I'd had things scripted or things I'd talk about, and I'd talk into the camera super loud, and she'd be like, oh, you're going to wake up the kids. But she said that like, she's like, I always knew that you were going to make it on YouTube, even when I thought your videos were terrible, because I would make her watch my videos. Right. And she's like, that was like all about learning how to code. And I'm like, look, watch this video. I'm talking about how I got a job as a developer. And she's like, I know how you got a job as a developer. Can I please go to sleep? I don't want to watch this. But she'd give me like brutally honest feedback, and she'd be like, that doesn't make sense, that's kind of like long-winded, I don't know about this, like if a beginner's watching this, like whatever you said, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. And then like I would improve, and like she would be extremely critical in the most constructive way. And I think that some of those early videos would get like there was things that made those videos better because of her and her feedback. And yeah, I always think about that quote of like, even when your videos sucked, I knew you were going to make it. Because that just like sums it up perfectly of our relationship. Brutally honest and super supportive at the same time.
Yeah. So one thing that strikes me about you and your wife is you all plan pretty long term. And a lot of people, they're so focused on the task at hand. They're focused on trying to pay the rent or trying to buy a new car to replace the clunker that's literally falling apart, and they're spending more money on repairs than the value of the car and stuff like that. Trying to keep up with health insurance and all these other different things, at least here in the U.S., that it's hard to look up from those tasks that are right in front of you and kind of see like the longer road ahead. But it sounds like you have planned pretty far ahead, and that's been one of your strengths. One of the ways that you've kind of like, I guess like your unfair advantage is that you're like super long thinking or forward thinking in terms of what's likely to happen and things like that. Can you talk about the role of planning?
Oh, man, I wish I could say that I plan more than I do, but I think that something that is a weird thing that I've been able to do like a lot of my life is that I kind of think about like the end goal first and then like just figure stuff out along the way. Like this is going to sound weird, but there was a lot of stuff that maybe it's funny because I've made fun of manifestation and I've made fun of those things before because I feel like they're a little bit too hocus pocusy for me, but there is a bit of like when you start thinking about what it is you want to do and then just start taking steps in that direction, right? Like that's pretty much what I've done with everything. There was one point in time when I remember I was working as it was like one of my first jobs in Vegas, and I heard people talk about like being a valet attendant and like how well they did and like how much money they made, and I was just like, I'm going to be a valet attendant. You could say it kind of just fell in my lap and I got that job, through like, I got that job from another, like eventually I ended up working at like probably one of the better places to be a valet attendant at. That club was like, we made good money working at that club. And I also worked at like some other like big places, and I kind of accomplished that. And then I kind of did the same thing with learning how to code. It was just like, it was a bit of a rocky start, and I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do at first. And I was just like, oh, I'm going to become a network engineer. I'm going to learn Linux. But then like that turned into like the other thing. But I eventually, like, the goal was to get a job making X amount of dollars that would allow me the freedom and potential to be able to like work remotely and like have like stability. And I accomplished that. And then like when I started the YouTube thing, like my goal was to just grow a channel, and I didn't know what I was doing when I first started. Back in like early 20s, I did like a little bit of acting, doing like some short films for like some student short films, and I did like a couple other like really low budget movies and stuff like that. So like maybe I had a little bit of camera presence, but if you go back to my very first videos that are still uploaded on YouTube now, you'd be like, that guy had zero camera presence, right? But like, I just knew that like to get to, step Z, I need to start with A, but I don't know what B, C, D, E, F, G are. But I'm going to figure them out. After I start with A, I'm going to go to B. And I try to plan, but I'm not... It's strange because I can't see too far out, because if I start planning too far ahead, I get very stressed out. And that's something that happens to me very often, because I start getting overwhelmed with everything that I would have to do to get to that point. And I've noticed that the thing that works best for me is just to kind of like set my mind on the goal that I want to accomplish, and then just start figuring out like, how do I get to those things from where I'm at right now? And just, we have all the information we will ever need right at our fingertips, right? We have Google, we have tools like ChatGPT, we have things that really make our processes easier. And I think that if you just kind of use those to your advantage, and if you are trying to accomplish something and want to get there, like that's the best way to do it. That's how I did it with learning how to code. That's how I did it with YouTube. Like I would stay up late, watch videos on like, I learned about lighting, I learned about cameras, I learned about angles, I learned about focal points, I learned about different types of of like there like so much about like editing and making B-roll, and like all of that stuff started from me making a video in a closet with a cell phone, super awkward with very bad lighting, to like now, like maybe my most recent videos aren't the best example, but I have some videos where I put a lot of effort into that stuff, and you can see like it looks like a highly produced video, and I'm talking about the ones I've edited personally, where like that's not the same guy, but it was just part of the journey, and being able to see like far enough ahead to where I'm like, okay, like these are the things I got to learn. I'm not going to worry about that big monster in the corner that I eventually have to get to, because in order for me to get to the final boss, I got to beat all these mobs first and then get through the mini bosses before I actually even get to that level. And I know that doesn't directly answer like how do I plan, but the truth is that I don't really plan. I just think about like what it is I want to do, and then I just kind of start. There's some planning involved in between there, but I wish I could tell you that I lay out every step, but I don't, because I again, it starts stressing me out, because it's most of the stuff that you try to accomplish is a ton of work. And when you start breaking things down to like the smallest granular step possible, it becomes almost procrastination, where I think that the truth is a lot of getting stuff done is just doing the thing. And if you sit there, and I've done this and I know other people do it, and you start like over researching stuff, and like you consume all the content, you read all the books, you watch all the videos, you read all the blogs, you plan out this big list, and then you've spent all this time and you haven't even done the first thing, where I think it's just better for you to do those things and like learn as you go and make your mistakes, learn from them, and just try to get better, and like keep repeating the process until you're eventually at the point where you want to be. I guess.
So what you hit on, like a lot of times planning can be a form of procrastination, and at the end of the day, you just need to, put your fingers on the keyboard and start getting the code done, or doing whatever task it is you seek to do. You talked about tutorial hell and how people get trapped into kind of preparing for building the projects rather than just starting building the projects, things like that. So, I mean, I can't underscore how many actionable takeaways you've given us, how much context you've given us by spending so much time talking about, your life story, especially the past few years, your learning the code journey, your journey into sobriety, like the family dynamic. You seem to really care about your kids and just making sure they have an amazing childhood. And it's like super inspiring. And I'm just going to encourage everybody who's made it this far, be sure to check out Dorian's channel. And, I'm really hyped to see what you do over the next year or two. Like, I'm optimistic that now that you've lifted this fog, that, you said it took like 6 months just to kind of return to like a normal baseline. And I feel like you're just getting started. Like, you're younger than me. You're in great shape from doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for years. That's one thing we didn't even talk about, is like, I encourage everybody to check out Dorian's video. Like, I destroyed my body for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but it saved me, like it's such a cool video, man. So I'll link to that in the description too, if you all want to watch that. But it's just been a blast finally sitting down and talking to you. And I know we talked like a long time ago, like many, many years ago, but like actually talking to you at length and being able to record this and put this out there so everybody can learn from your insights and, hopefully incorporate some of your, advice, like take what seems to work, what seems relevant, and leave the rest. But I'm sure that there's something here that pretty much everyone can take away just for their own coding journeys, for their journeys into adulthood, into parenthood, if people decide to go that route. Like, I think it's like super inspiring, and I just thank you for making so much time out of your busy Saturday morning that you could have spent, hanging out with your kids, standing here talking in front of a microphone to another guy talking in front of a microphone.
All good, man. I really enjoyed having this talk, and I remember our first conversation. Way back when I first got started. I think it came from a Reddit post that I commented on, and then you let me into that secret society Discord of programming YouTubers, and I'm no longer in there because I've had so many existential crises where I decide I'm not a programming YouTuber, but I still remember how much that impacted me early throughout my journey. And I remember you telling me, like, just be careful, don't burn out. A lot of people who make YouTube videos and try to do this stuff burn out. And I burnt out a few times, not because of, that you gave me good advice. I think it just kind of happens, but then like taking, all of that and then coming back and being able to like chit chat and like be on the free Camp podcast, from like, just remembering how I was using this platform to learn how to code, to be able to actually interview or be interviewed by the creator of the platform is kind of very serendipitous. And like, I would have never thought that I would end up here talking to you, and it's been a blast. And I really appreciate you having me on.
Awesome, man. Well, everybody tuning in, I hope you've enjoyed this. Until next week, happy coding.